The void outside the viewport was dominated by the swirling, bruised atmosphere of the gas giant known as Aura's 4. It was a massive, turbulent sphere of crushed violet and sickly yellow gases, beautiful in a way that suggested toxic death to anyone foolish enough to get too close. To Princess Asivia of House Vireliath, it looked exactly how she felt, pressurized, volatile, and trapped in a gravitational well she had no interest in navigating. She stood on the observation deck of the Gilded Fang, her family's heavy cruiser, watching the human diplomatic station rotate slowly against the backdrop of the giant. The station was a utilitarian construct of gray steel and blinking navigation lights, ugly and functional, much like the humans themselves. Asevia adjusted the collar of her formal diplomat's gown. The fabric was stiff, woven with ceremonial microfilaments that shimmered like liquid mercury, but it felt like a cage. She was trained for combat armor, for the weight of a pulse rifle in her hands and the smell of ozone after a breach charge detonated. She was not trained for small talk, canapes, or the suffocating boredom of interspecies peace summits. Her reflection in the viewport showed a woman who looked dangerous even in finery. Her skin was the color of moonlight on snow, pale and luminous, contrasting sharply with eyes that were entirely black, save for the iris which burned with a cold, electric blue. She was tall, her build lean and muscular beneath the gown, a predator forced to play dress-up. A chime sounded at the door behind her. "Enter," she said, her voice dropping an octave to the command tone she used with subordinates. The door slid open to reveal Kalen, her head of security. He was a towering slab of Vireliath muscle, encased in the obsidian armor of the Royal Guard. He bowed, though his eyes remained alert, scanning the empty room out of habit. "The shuttle is prepped, Your Highness," Kalen said. "The human delegation is expecting us in 20 minutes. The station commander has promised a secure environment, though their definition of security is somewhat lax compared to our standards." Asivia turned away from the window, her lip curling slightly. "Their definition of security involves primitive kinetic barriers and guards who blink too much," she said. "I suppose I should be grateful they are not greeting us with sticks and stones." Kalen did not smile. Humor was not in his programming, or perhaps it had just been beaten out of him during basic training. "We have scanned the arrival deck. There are no active threats. However, Lord Vax of the Zephyrian Dominion has arrived early. He is seated at the main table." Asevia groaned, a sound that was decidedly unroyal. "Vax. Of course. The galaxy is vast, infinite in its complexity, and yet I am forced to share a dinner table with a lizard who thinks preening his scales is a substitute for personality." She swept past Kalen, the mercury fabric of her gown hissing against the metal floor. "Let us get this over with," she said. "If I am lucky, perhaps the station will suffer a catastrophic hull breach and I can leave early." Kalen fell into step behind her, his hand resting on the hilt of his shock blade. "I will prioritize your extraction in such an event, Highness. I know you will." "Kalen, that is the problem. Sometimes a princess just wants to drift." The docking bay of the human station smelled of recycled air, hydraulic fluid, and the faint, lingering scent of fried food from the lower decks. It was a sensory assault compared to the sterile, ozone-crisp air of the Vireliath cruiser. Asevia walked down the ramp, her expression frozen in a mask of imperious disinterest. A delegation of humans waited for them. They were soft-looking creatures, lacking natural armor or claws, wrapped in cloth suits that seemed impractical for any environment other than a climate-controlled office. At the front was Station Commander Halloway, a balding man with a nervous sweat already beading on his forehead. "Princess Asivia," Holloway said, bowing low. "Welcome to Station Ors. We are honored by the presence of the royal house of Viraliath." Asivia stopped 3 paces from him. She looked him up and down, dissecting him with a single glance. High blood pressure, elevated cortisol levels, a concealed sidearm he likely did not know how to use effectively. "Commander," she said, her voice smooth and cold. "Your station vibrates. The stabilizer couplings on Deck 4 are misaligned. You might want to attend to that before the gravity plating fails and flattens your guests." Holloway blinked, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. Yes, thank you, Your Highness. We will look into it." Standing slightly behind the commander was a younger man, lean and dark-haired, wearing the gray coveralls of a technician but with a translator's earpiece hooked over one ear. He was holding a data pad and looking at Asivia not with awe or fear, but with a tilted head and a spark of amused curiosity. This was Jace. He stepped forward as the commander floundered, tapping his data pad. "She means the vibration in the floor plates." "Sir," Jace said. His voice was a pleasant baritone, rougher than the polished tones of the diplomats. "It's a harmonic resonance from the recycling plant. I told maintenance about it last week, but they said it adds character." Asivia shifted her gaze to him. The technician did not look away. He had a smudge of grease on his jawline, and his eyes were a warm, earthy brown, the color of dirt, she thought, but fertile dirt, the kind things grew in. "Character," Asivia repeated. "Is that what humans call structural incompetence?" Jace shrugged. "A loose, easy motion. We call it budget cuts, Your Highness. But character sounds better in the quarterly report." Asivia felt a small, sharp twitch of interest. He was not cowering. He was not posturing. He was simply standing there, mocking his own superiors in front of a woman who could order the orbital bombardment of his home world. "You are the translator?" she asked. "Technician second class Jace Miller," he said. "But I speak 3 dialects of Viraliath and a little bit of High Zephyrian. So they dragged me up from the engine room to make sure nobody accidentally declares war over a mistranslated appetizer." Asivia narrowed her eyes. "See that you do not mistranslate me. Technician Miller. I have very little patience for errors." "I will do my best," he said, offering a lopsided grin that showed a hint of teeth. "But if you start reciting poetry, I might have to improvise." Commander Holloway looked as if he might faint. He quickly gestured toward the turbolift. "If you would please follow me, Your Highness. The banquet hall is prepared." Asivia swept forward, ignoring the commander and brushing past the technician. As she passed him, she smelled engine oil and something else, something organic and warm, like solar heat on skin. It was a stark contrast to the sterile, metallic scent of her own people. The banquet hall was a glass-walled observation deck at the top of the station, offering a panoramic view of the gas giant. The table was long, set with white linens and crystal that looked fragile enough to shatter under a heavy breath. Seated across from Asivia was Lord Vax of the Zypharian Dominion. He was a reptilian humanoid with iridescent scales that shifted color from green to gold as he moved. He wore a high collar of jeweled velvet and held a goblet of wine in a clawed hand, swirling it with an affectation that set Asivia's teeth on edge. "Princess," Vax hissed, his forked tongue flickering out to taste the air. "You look radiant, like a supernova before the collapse." Asivia took her seat, her movements precise and predatory. "And you, Lord Vax, look like you are molting. Is that a patch of dry scale on your neck? Or is that just your personality flaking off? Vax laughed, a dry, rasping sound. Always the sharp blade. A Sevia. I admire that. It is why the Dominion has always sought an alliance with Vireliath. Our bloodlines would mix well, fire and venom. A Sevia picked up her fork, examining the tines as if considering how easily they would pierce reptilian hide. I prefer to keep my blood to myself. Vax. And as for venom, you have enough for both of us. Jace, the technician translator, was standing behind the commander's chair, slightly to Acevia's left. He was trying to blend into the background, but Acevia could feel his eyes on her. Every time she delivered a barb to Vax, she saw the corner of Jace's mouth twitch. He was enjoying this. The dinner progressed with agonizing slowness. Courses of gelatinous protein and chemically treated vegetables were served. Commander Holloway droned on about trade tariffs and mining rights in the neutral zone. Vax continued to leer across the table, his gaze dropping frequently to the low cut of Acevia's gown. You know, Vax said, leaning forward and knocking over a salt shaker with his elbow. In my culture, a female warrior is considered a prize, but one must wonder if the rumors are true. They say Vireliath women are cold to the touch, ice in the veins. He reached out, his claw hovering near Acevia's hand on the table. I could warm you up, princess. Acevia did not move her hand. She stared at him, her blue eyes burning. Touch me, Vax, and you will lose that hand before your brain registers the pain. Vax pulled back, chuckling nervously, but the insult hung in the air. Acevia felt a surge of irritation that bordered on rage. She hated this. She hated politics, leering lizards and sweating humans. She wanted to break something. She wanted to shock the room into silence just to see the look on their faces. She glanced to her left. Jace had moved closer to refill her water glass. He was within arm's reach. He looked bored, too, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, his eyes glazing over as Holloway discussed the finer points of helium extraction. A wicked, impulsive idea formed in Acevia's mind. She wanted to disrupt the flow. She wanted to punish Vax for his rudeness by ignoring him completely and focusing on the lowest-ranking person in the room. And she wanted to see if the human technician with the smart mouth could handle a little royal attention. As Jace leaned in to pour the water, Acevia moved. It was not a subtle gesture, nor was it polite. It was the motion of a predator toying with prey. She dropped her left hand beneath the table, reached out, and clamped her fingers firmly onto Jace's inner thigh. She expected him to jump. She expected him to drop the pitcher, stammer, turn red, and cause a scene that would humiliate the commander and shut Vax up. She squeezed, her grip iron strong, feeling the muscle of his leg beneath the rough fabric of his coveralls. Got you, she thought. But instead of a yelp or a stumble, the universe seemed to fold in on itself. The moment her skin made contact with his leg through the fabric, a sound like a cracking whip echoed through the banquet hall. It wasn't sound, exactly, it was a pressure wave, a psychic scream that slammed into every mind in the room. Acevia gasped, her eyes widening. Her hand was stuck, not stuck physically but magnetically, energetically fused to his leg. A searing heat, white-hot and agonizing, shot from his thigh into her palm, racing up her arm like liquid fire. Jace dropped the water pitcher. It shattered on the floor, glass exploding outward. But the sound was lost beneath the rising hum that began to vibrate through the very structure of the station. He did not scream. He couldn't. His back arched violently, his eyes rolling back in his head until only the whites were visible. Beneath Acevia's hand, the fabric of his coveralls seemed to dissolve, burned away by an internal light, on the skin of his thigh, directly where she gripped him. A complex geometric pattern began to sear itself into existence. It was glowing violet, the royal color of House Vereliath. "What did you do?" Vax shouted, standing up and knocking his chair over. Asevia tried to pull away, panic flaring in her chest for the first time in years. She yanked her arm, but the bond was absolute. She could feel Jace's heartbeat thundering against her palm, but it wasn't just a heartbeat anymore. It was synchronization. Thump, 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 thump. It was matching hers. "Get it off." Jace choked out, his voice distorted, layered with a metallic resonance. The floor beneath Jace's feet buckled. The carpet tore open as if slashed by invisible claws. From the metal subflooring, streams of silver nanotechnology erupted like geysers. They weren't the station's tech. This was ancient, dormant matter that had been hiding in the very molecular structure of the environment, waiting for a signal. The nanotech swarmed up Jace's legs, weaving into a lattice of armor, piercing his skin, fusing with his biology. Commander Halloway was screaming into his comms, "Security! Security to the banquet hall! We are under attack! No!" Asevia yelled, her voice booming with an unnatural amplification. "Do not fire!" She finally managed to wrench her hand free, but the connection did not break. A visible arc of violet electricity spanned the distance between her palm and Jace's thigh, tethering them together. Jace fell to his knees, clutching his chest. The nanotech had reached his torso, forming intricate, glowing filigree along his ribs. He looked up at Asevia, and for a second, his brown eyes were gone. They were replaced by spinning mandalas of blue light, the same light that burned in Asevia's own eyes. "The symbol," Vax whispered, backing away, his face drained of color. "Look at the symbol on his skin. That is the mark of the Ascendant. That is impossible. That is a dead legend." Security guards burst through the double doors, rifles raised. They were human Marines clad in riot gear. "Drop him," the lead Marine shouted, aiming at Jace. "Stand down," Asevia roared. She threw her hand out, instinctively trying to shield Jace. A pulse of kinetic energy, visible as a shimmering distortion in the air, erupted from her outstretched palm. It hit the squad of Marines like a physical wall, lifting them off their feet and hurling them backward into the corridor. The glass windows of the observation deck cracked, spiderwebs of white fracturing the view of the gas giant. Asevia stared at her hand. She had never possessed telekinetic ability. Her people were strong, yes. But this was something else. This was raw power. She looked down at Jace. He had collapsed fully onto his side, his body convulsing as the silver nanotech settled under his skin, fading from view but leaving behind faint, glowing circuit lines. The heat in the room was suffocating. Kaelin and her Vereliath royal guard stormed in from the other entrance, weapons drawn. They assessed the situation in a microsecond, the human guards incapacitated, the alien noble cowering, and their princess glowing with an aura of violet energy, standing over a fallen human. "Secure the perimeter," Kaelin barked. He rushed to Asevia's side, looking from her to Jace with a mixture of confusion and horror. "Highness, your arm. It is resonating." Asevia grabbed her wrist. The veins in her forearm were glowing, pulsing in time with the technician's unconscious body. She felt a pull, a physical need to be closer to him, as if gravity had shifted and he was the new center of the universe. "Take him," Asevia commanded, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Kaelin hesitated. "The human? Take him to the Gilded Fang, now!" Asevia snarled. "Do not let the station security touch him. If anyone tries to stop you, kill them." Kaelin nodded once. He gestured to two of his guards who holstered their weapons and hoisted Jace's limp body between them. Commander Halloway had crawled out from under the table. "You cannot take him. He is a citizen of the Alliance. This is kidnapping. Asevia turned on him. Her eyes were ablaze, and the air around her crackled with static. This is not kidnapping. Commander, this is salvage. She turned and marched toward the exit, the tether of energy between her and Jace fading from sight but pulling tight against her soul. She could feel his pain. She could feel his confusion. It was leaking into her mind like water into a sinking ship. The medical bay of the Gilded Fang was a cathedral of science. The walls were lined with bioglass and floating diagnostic arrays. In the center of the room, Jace lay on a suspension table, a field of anti-gravity holding him a few inches above the surface. He was stripped to the waist. The symbol Asevia's touch had burned into his thigh was glowing softly, and the intricate lines of circuitry that the nanotech had built were visible beneath the skin of his chest and arms. Asevia stood on the other side of the containment glass, watching him. She had refused to leave to change her gown. The mercury fabric was torn at the hem, and her hair was coming loose from its intricate braids. Chief Scientist Vorian, an elderly Vireliath with skin like parchment and eyes that had seen too many autopsies, was studying a holographic display that hovered over Jace's body. He was muttering to himself, his long fingers dancing through streams of data. "Well," Asevia demanded, "speak, Vorian. What is happening to him? And why does my arm feel like it is on fire?" Vorian turned slowly. He looked terrified. For a man who dissected plague victims for fun, terror was a concerning look. "Highness," he said, his voice trembling. "This human. His genetic structure is displaying anomalies I have never seen. Or rather, anomalies I have only seen in the Forbidden Archives." Getting to the point, Asevia snapped. "When you touched him," Vorian said, pointing to the data stream, "you initiated a biolock sequence. We thought the stories were myths, propaganda from the First Empire. But the readings are undeniable. Inside this human's blood, hidden within what we assumed was junk DNA, was a dormant construct." "A construct?" Asevia asked. "You mean a disease?" "No," Vorian said. "A weapon. A symbiotic war system designed by the progenitors of House Vireliath. It is called the Sinvara, the Soul Eater. It was designed to bond with a host, to turn a living being into a conduit for pure psionic energy." Asevia looked through the glass at Jace's sleeping face. He looked so ordinary, despite the glowing lines. He looked like a man who fixed vibrations in floor plates. "Why him?" she whispered. "Why a human technician?" Vorian shook his head. "That is the mystery. The Sinvara was designed to only accept the blood of the royal house. By all logic, the contact should have killed him instantly. His biology should have rejected nanotech. Instead, it adapted. It recognized him." He tapped a key, and the hologram zoomed in on Jace's DNA helix. "See here? This coding? It is human. Yes, but it has been spliced, tens of thousands of years ago. Someone tampered with his bloodline. They hid the receptor specifically so that one day, if a royal of Vireliath touched him with intent, this would happen." Asevia felt the room spin. She gripped the console for support. "Intent?" she asked. "I touched him as a joke. Vorian, I grabbed his leg to annoy a lizard. The intent was not the joke. Highness," Vorian said quietly. "The intent was the energy. You channeled emotion. You made physical contact. That was the key turning in the lock." He looked at Asevia's glowing arm. "And now, the circuit is complete. You are the power source. He is the weapon. You are bonded, Highness." "Bonded?" Asevia repeated the word as if it were a curse. "Biochemically, psionically. If he dies, the feedback will likely lobotomize you. If you die, the weapon inside him will detonate and take this entire ship with it." Asevia stared at the technician. She remembered his laugh. She remembered the smell of engine oil and warm skin. She remembered thinking he was amusing prey. She had played a game, and she had lost. She had reached out to tease a human and had accidentally shackled herself to a living doomsday device. Jace stirred on the table. His eyes fluttered open. They were brown again, but deep within the pupil, a violet spark lingered. He looked around the room, dazed, until his eyes locked onto Asevia through the glass. "Princess?" he croaked, his voice raspy. Asevia didn't know whether to comfort him or shoot him out of an airlock. "Don't speak, human," she said, though her voice lacked its usual venom. Jace tried to sit up, wincing as the lights under his skin flared. "That dinner," he murmured, a faint, delirious smile touching his lips. "That was one hell of a first date." Asevia closed her eyes and rested her forehead against the cool glass. "We are in so much trouble," she whispered to herself. The ship's intercom crackled to life. "Highness, this is the bridge. The station commander is hailing us. He says he has contacted the Alliance fleet, and we have multiple unknown contacts dropping out of hyperspace on the perimeter. They are powering weapons." Asevia opened her eyes. The boredom was gone. The suffocating stillness of the diplomatic mission was a memory. "Raise the shields," she ordered, her voice turning to steel. "Prepare for an emergency jump." "Where are we going?" Kalen's voice came over the comms. "Anywhere but here," Asevia said, staring at the man she had accidentally claimed. "Just get us into the dark." She looked at Jace one last time. "Welcome to the family. Technician Miller," she said softly. "Try to survive the night." The holographic projection of the Vireliath High Council shimmered in the center of Asevia's private quarters aboard the Gilded Fang. The air in the room was frigid, cooled to a temperature that human lungs would find painful. But Asevia was sweating. The projection displayed 3 figures, their faces obscured by ceremonial cowls of woven kinetic mesh, but their voices were unmistakably clear, resonating with the imperious weight of 10,000 years of rule. The figure in the center, Matriarch Tyria, spoke first. Her voice was not a sound, but a vibration that rattled the bones behind the ears. "The report is confirmed. Asevia. The anomaly is a biological resonance event. You have activated a dormant gene sequence within a terrain subject." Asevia stood at attention, her back rigid, her hands clasped behind her. She had changed out of the ruined diplomatic gown into her flight suit, a second skin of matte black polymer designed for high-G maneuvers and vacuum exposure. She looked less like a princess now and more like the weapon she had been trained to be. "It was an accident." "High Matriarch," Asevia said, her tone clipped. "A diplomatic miscalculation." "A miscalculation," Tyria repeated, the scorn evident even through the digital distortion. "You touched a primitive and unlocked the Sinvara. Do you comprehend the magnitude of this error? That technology was buried for a reason. It is a heresy to the purity of the bloodline." The figure to the right, a war sage named Korth, leaned forward. The mesh covering his face rippled. "The human cannot contain it. He will burn out within days, perhaps hours. When he does, the release of psionic energy will shatter the hull of your cruiser. You are endangering a royal asset for the sake of curiosity." "I am not endangering the ship," Asevia countered. "He is in stasis. The containment field is stable. For now," Korth said. "But the bond is two-way, is it not? We monitor your vitals. Princess, your cortisol is spiked. Your neural pathways are synchronizing with his... You are feeling his fear." Asevia tightened her jaw. She could feel it. It was a low, throbbing ache at the base of her skull, a phantom panic that did not belong to her. It was Jace, even in unconsciousness. His mind was screaming. "There is only one solution," Tyria declared. "The council has voted. You are ordered to purge the containment cell, eject the human into the void, and detonate the biological fail-safes. Destroy the hybrid before other houses detect the energy signature. If the Zypharian Dominion learns we have reactivated the Sinvara, it will be war." Asivia felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "He is a living being," she said slowly. "He is innocent. I did this to him. He is a containment breach." Tyria snapped. "You are a daughter of Virilayeth. You do not have the luxury of conscience. You have the duty of survival. Execute the order, Asivia, or we will remotely override your ship's AI and do it for you. And if we are forced to intervene, your command codes will be revoked permanently." The hologram flickered and vanished, leaving Asivia alone in the silence of her quarters. She stared at the empty space where the council had been. Destroy him. It was the logical choice. It was the safe choice. If she killed Jace, the bond would break. She might suffer some neural backlash, a migraine that lasted a week, but she would be free. She would. She could go back to her life of boredom and luxury, drifting between space stations, mocking diplomats, safe in her tower of privilege. But then the sensation hit her again, a wave of terror, cold and sharp, washing over her mind. It was not generic fear. It was specific. It was the fear of the dark, the fear of being small in a universe that was suddenly too big. It was Jace's fear. She looked at her hand, the one that had grabbed his thigh. The skin still tingled with a faint residual charge. She realized two things at that moment. First, she could not kill him. The very idea made her physically nauseous, a rejection deeper than morality. It was biological. The bond forbade it. Second, the council would not stop at killing Jace. If they analyzed her, if they saw how deep the connection went, they would purge her too. To them, she was now contaminated. Asivia moved. She grabbed her helmet from the rack and tapped her comms unit, opening a direct line to the hangar deck, but bypassing the bridge. "Override code Omicron 9 Vantage." She spoke into the mic. "Authorization Asivia Prime. Unlock the docking clamps on the reconnaissance scout vessel Wraith." The ship's computer responded, its voice devoid of judgment. "Authorization accepted. Pre-flight sequence initiated. Warning, this action is not logged in the flight plan. Silence the alarms." Asivia ordered. "Loop the security feed in the medbay hallway for the next 5 minutes." She sprinted out of her quarters. The corridors of the Gilded Fang were quiet, the night rotation crew minimal. She moved like a shadow, her boots making no sound on the deck plates. When she reached the medical bay, she found the 2 guards she had posted earlier. "Leave us," she commanded. "I need to perform a final inspection before we process the subject." The guards saluted and marched down the hall. As soon as they turned the corner, Asivia keyed the door and burst inside. Jace was still floating in the stasis field, his chest rising and falling in a jagged rhythm. The glowing circuitry on his skin was brighter now, pulsing with a violet luminosity that lit up the darkened room. Asivia went to the console and killed the stasis field. Jace dropped onto the padding of the table with a heavy thud. He groaned, a sound of pure misery, but did not wake. "I am sorry. Human," Asivia muttered. She grabbed his arm and hauled him upright. He was heavier than he looked, dead weight in her arms. "This is going to be unpleasant." She draped his arm over her shoulder and half-dragged, half-carried him toward the emergency airlock that connected the medbay to the auxiliary hangar. Her muscles strained under the effort. For all his lean build, the technician was dense, and the strange biometallic density of the weapon inside him seemed to add mass. She reached the Wraith, a sleek, angular ship designed for deep space stealth and little else. It was essentially two massive engines strapped to a cockpit and a closet-sized living quarter. She shoved Jace into the passenger crash couch and strapped him in. As she secured the buckles, his head lollied to the side, and his eyes cracked open. They were glazed, unseeing, swimming with fever. "Mom," he mumbled, "the microwave is broken again." Asivia paused, her hand hovering over his chest. "Not quite," she whispered. She jumped into the pilot's seat and began flipping switches with practiced speed. The engines hummed to life, a low, predatory growl. On the bridge of the Gilded Fang, the alarm she had silenced finally overrode her command. "Security breach." The voice of Kalen roared over the general channel. "Hangar Bay 2. Unauthorized launch sequence. Stop her." Asivia slammed the throttle forward. The docking clamps disengaged with a shriek of tearing metal. She hadn't waited for the full release. The Wraith shot out of the cruiser's belly like a bullet leaving a chamber. "Princess," Kalen's voice cut through her local comms. "Stand down! We have lock-on! Do not force us to fire!" Asivia ignored him. She punched the coordinates for a blind jump, random vectors, deep into the uncharted heavy-gravity sectors of the expanse. "Hold on!" "Jace," she said through gritted teeth. She engaged the hyperdrive. The stars outside the viewport stretched into infinite lines of white light, and the universe snapped backward. The crushing force of the jump slammed her into her seat, and beside her. Jace screamed in his sleep, a sound that tore through her own mind like a jagged blade. The jump lasted for 6 hours. For Asivia, it felt like 6 years. Every minute was a battle against the sensory overload of the bond. As Jace dreamed, she saw what he saw. She saw flashes of a life she didn't know. A rainy street in a human city, the smell of cheap coffee, the loneliness of a small apartment, the face of a woman she assumed was his mother, looking disappointed. These memories were mixed with terrifying abstract visions from the Sinvara, colossal geometric cities burning in violet fire, the sensation of falling through a black sun, and a voice that sounded like crunching tectonic plates whispering, "Candidate Prime, integrate, integrate." When the Wraith finally dropped out of hyperspace, they were drifting in the shadow of a broken asteroid belt, deep in the dead space between star systems. The silence of the ship was deafening. Asivia unbuckled and stumbled toward the small kitchenette to get water. Her hands were shaking. She drank deeply, the water splashing down her chin, grounding her. Behind her, the rustling of fabric. She turned. Jace was awake. He was sitting up in the crash couch, gripping the armrest so hard his knuckles were white. He looked terrible. His skin was pale and clammy, sweat matting his dark hair to his forehead. The glowing lines on his chest had dimmed to a faint, bruising purple. He looked at the cockpit, at the stars, and then at Asivia. His expression was a mixture of confusion and rising panic. "Where?" He croaked. His voice was wrecked. "Where am I?" "You are on the scout vessel, Wraith," Asivia said, leaning against the bulkhead. "We are currently nowhere, which is the safest place to be." Jace rubbed his temples, wincing. "My head feels like it's full of broken glass. And I hear voices, not voices, and static. That is the residue of the jump." Asivia lied. "It will pass." He looked down at his chest, seeing the faint glow beneath his shirt. His breath hitched. He clawed at the fabric, pulling the collar down to reveal the alien filigree etched into his skin. "What did you do to me?" he whispered. The panic in his voice was rising, sharp and jagged. "I remember the dinner. I remember you grabbing me. And then, fire, just fire." Asivia set the water pouch down. She crossed her arms, assuming a defensive posture. I did not intend for this to happen. Jace, it was an accident. An accident? Jace let out a laugh that sounded more like a sob. You turned me into a glow stick. Princess, I can feel things moving under my skin. I can hear math. Do you understand? I can hear geometry screaming at me. He tried to stand, but his legs wobbled. He collapsed back into the chair. Take me back, he demanded. Take me back to the station. I need a doctor. A human doctor. I cannot take you back, Asevia said quietly. If I take you back, you will be dead within the hour. My people, the council, they ordered your execution. The room went silent. Jace stared at her, processing the words. Execution? Why? I fixed their floor vibrations. I translated their menus. Why do they want to kill me? Because of what you are now, Asevia said. She took a step closer, her black eyes serious. When I touched you, we activated a legacy weapon system embedded in your DNA. It is called the Sinvara. It is ancient, dangerous, and strictly forbidden. You are not just a technician anymore. Jace, you are a biological warhead. Jace stared at her. He looked, waiting for the punchline. He waited for her to tell him this was another cruel royal joke. You're insane, he said flatly. You're actually crazy. This is a kidnapping. You're some kind of psycho princess who collects pets. Think what you want, Asevia said, her temper flaring. But right now, I am the only thing standing between you and a squadron of disintegration drones. I abandoned my rank, stole a ship, and fled into exile to save your miserable life. So you can thank me, or you can be silent. Jace glared at her. Thank you. You grabbed my thigh. That's assault, lady. In my culture, that's a lawsuit. In yours, apparently, it's a galactic incident. The absurdity of his statement, delivered with such genuine indignation, almost made Asevia smile. Almost. We are past lawsuits. Jace, we are in survival mode. 2 cycles passed in the cramped darkness of the Wraith. The ship was not built for 2 people. It was built for 1 pilot on short-range patrols. The living space was essentially a corridor with a bunk at one end and a refresher unit at the other. They were constantly in each other's way. They breathed the same recycled air. They brushed shoulders every time one of them moved. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Jace spent the first cycle sulking and panicking in equal measure. He paced the 3 meters of available floor space, muttering to himself, occasionally stopping to clutch his head when the vision spiked. Asevia spent the time piloting, scanning frequencies, and trying to ignore the fact that she was now a fugitive. She watched Jace from the corner of her eye. He was resilient. She had to give him that. Most humans would have gone catatonic by now. Jace just became more sarcastic. By the second night, or what passed for night in the void, the atmosphere shifted. The fear was still there, but it was being overlaid by something else. The bond between them was not just a psychic link, it was a physical tether. When Jace was in pain, Asevia's muscles ached. When Asevia was anxious, Jace became restless. And beneath it all, there was a low, humming current of attraction. It was chemical, engineered by the weapon to ensure the host and the activator remained close. But it felt confusingly real. Jace was sitting on the edge of the bunk, shirtless. The air recyclers were struggling and the cabin was hot. He was running a diagnostic on his own arm using a portable med scanner he had found in the emergency kit. "You're staring," he said, without looking up. "I am monitoring," Asevia corrected from the pilot's chair. She swiveled around to face him. "You're staring," he insisted. "You're looking at your artwork." He gestured to his torso. The circuitry had settled. It was no longer angry red, but a cool, pulsing violet that traced the lines of his obliques and wrapped around his ribs like a cage of light. It was terrifying, yes. But Asevia could not deny that it was also aesthetically beautiful. It highlighted the lean muscle of his stomach, the sharp definition of his shoulders. "Does it hurt?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. "It itches," Jace said, "like a sunburn that goes all the way to the bone, and sometimes it feels like it's thinking." He looked up at her. His eyes were dark, vulnerable. "Can I ask you something? And I want a real answer. No royal cryptic nonsense." "Ask," Asevia said. "Why did you really grab me?" "At dinner." Asevia looked away. She studied the navigation console, the drifting stars. "I was bored," she said. "You were the only real thing in the room. Everything else was plastic and lies. You smelled like grease and sweat. You made a joke about structural failure. I wanted to make contact with something that wasn't performing." Jace snorted softly. "So I was a novelty. You were a distraction," she said. "I did not know you were destined." She stood up and walked over to him. The space was so small that her knees almost brushed his. She reached out, hesitating, then placed her fingertips on the glowing line tracing his sternum. Jace flinched, his breath catching in his throat, but he didn't pull away. The moment her skin touched the mark, the hum in the air grew louder. Asevia felt a rush of endorphins, a spike of pleasure that made her knees weak. She saw Jace's pupils dilate. "It feels warm," she whispered. "It feels like a live wire," Jace murmured, his voice rough. His hand moved, almost involuntarily, coming up to rest on her hip. The contact seared through the flight suit. Asevia's heart hammered against her ribs. This was dangerous. This was the weapon manipulating them, pushing them together to strengthen the bond. But knowing that didn't make the desire any less potent. "We should not do this," Asevia said, though she did not move her hand. "Probably not," Jace agreed. He leaned in slightly. "But since we're probably going to die soon anyway..." He didn't finish the sentence. The ship's proximity alarm screamed, shattering the moment. Asevia spun around, launching herself back into the pilot's seat. Jace scrambled to look over her shoulder. On the radar screen, 3 red dots were closing in fast. Tracers. Asevia cursed, her fingers flying across the controls. "Who are they?" Jace asked, the sarcasm gone. "Mercenaries," she said grimly. "Bounty hunters. And behind them." "That signature belongs to a Viriliath Enforcer-class interceptor. My cousin has sent the dogs." She punched the thrusters, throwing the Wraith into a corkscrew spin to evade the incoming missile lock. "Hold on!" she yelled. Jace grabbed the back of her chair. "I thought you said this was the safest place to be." "I lied!" Asevia shouted back as the ship shuddered under the impact of a glancing energy bolt. "I lie a lot. It's a character flaw." She pulled the ship hard to the left, diving toward the asteroid field. "What exactly did you awaken inside me?" "Asevia!" Jace yelled over the roar of the engines. Asevia glanced back at him, her eyes glowing with that terrible, beautiful blue light. A weapon. Jace! Or a king. Or maybe both. But right now, you are just the cargo. Sit down and let me drive." She slammed the throttle to maximum, and the Wraith plunged into the debris field, with the wolves snapping at their heels. The chase through the asteroid belt was a nightmare of physics. Asevia flew with a desperation that bordered on madness, skimming the surface of tumbling rocks, using the debris as a shield against the plasma fire raining down from the Enforcer ship. "They can track the energy signature," Asevia yelled. "As long as you are glowing, they can see us." Jace looked down at his chest. It was blazing bright now, reacting to his adrenaline. How do I turn it off? You cannot. It is linked to your heart rate. Calm down. Calm down, Jace shouted. Someone is shooting lasers at us. Asevia banked the ship around a massive chunk of iron ore. A missile detonated against the rock, sending a shockwave that rattled the Wraith's hull plates. Sparks showered down from the ceiling. We need to mask the signal, Asevia said, her mind racing. We need a heavier radiation source. She scanned the sensors. There, deep in the center of the belt, a derelict mining station with a leaking fusion core. It was radiating lethal levels of gamma rays, but it would hide Jace's biosignal. We are going into the radiation zone, she announced. Will that kill us? It might give us tumors in 20 years, Asevia said, but the enforcers will kill us in 20 seconds. Choose, go, Jace yelled. Asevia dove the ship toward the rotting hulk of the station. The radiation alarms began to bleat, a frantic, rhythmic warning. She ignored them, piloting the Wraith into the open hangar bay of the derelict. She cut the engines immediately, plunging them into darkness and silence, save for the ticking of the cooling thrusters. Outside, the enforcer ship swept past, its sensors blinded by the fusion leak. It circled once, then boosted away, searching the outer perimeter. They waited in the dark for an hour. Jace was breathing hard. Asevia was slumped in the pilot's seat. That, Jace whispered, was the craziest thing I have ever done. And I once ate cafeteria sushi on a Tuesday. Asevia let out a breathy laugh, the adrenaline crash hitting her. You have a strange definition of bravery. Technician? Jace leaned back against the bulkhead, the glow of his chest illuminating his face in the dark cabin. He looked at her, really looked at her, stripping away the title and the fear. So, he said quietly, a king, huh? Asevia turned her chair to face him. The shadows hid her eyes, but he could hear the weight in her voice. The Sinvara was designed to create the ultimate ruler, she said. A being with the strategic mind of a Vireliath and the adaptability of a lower species. Someone who could interface with technology and biology seamlessly. It was meant to end wars. But, Jace asked. But it ended worlds instead, she said. The power was too great. It corrupted the hosts. They became tyrants, monsters. That is why it was banned. That is why my family wants you dead. They are terrified that you will become a god, Jace. And they are terrified that I will be your high priestess. Jace looked at his hands, watching the faint violet pulse in his veins. I don't want to be a god, he said. I just want to go home and watch old movies. Asevia stood up and walked to him. She reached out and took his hand. This time, the jolt was less violent, more of a steady, comforting warmth. I do not think home is an option anymore, she said. But if we survive this, I promise you I will help you control it. I will not let you become a monster. Jace squeezed her hand. And if I do, then I will be the one to stop you, she said. It was a threat, but it sounded like a vow. Jace nodded slowly. Deal. He paused, then gestured to the glowing circuitry on his ribs. So, does this come with a manual? Or am I just supposed to figure out how to shoot lightning by trial and error? Asevia smirked, the first genuine smile he had seen on her face. We are going to a place that might have answers. An old temple. A place where the failed experiments were discarded. That sounds ominous, Jace noted. It is. Asevia agreed. Get some sleep. Jace, tomorrow. We go to school. She released his hand and turned back to the console, but the warmth of his skin lingered on her palm. a ghost of a touch that frightened her more than the armada hunting them. She was falling. She was falling fast, and there was no bottom to this well. The moon was a desolate sphere of gray rock and frozen methane oceans, orbiting a gas giant that had long since burned out into a dark dwarf. There was no atmosphere to scatter the starlight, so the sky was a harsh, uncompromising black, pierced by the diamond-hard glint of distant suns. It was a graveyard world, silent and cold, which made it the perfect place for the House of Viriliath to bury its mistakes. Asevia brought the wraith down into a canyon that scarred the moon's equator. The landing was rough. The scout ship's landing struts groaned as they settled into the shifting regolith, kicking up a cloud of dust that settled instantly in the vacuum. Inside the cockpit, the silence returned, heavier than before. "We are here," Asevia said, flipping the shutdown sequence switches. Jace unbuckled his harness. He looked pale, the violet circuitry on his chest pulsing with a slow, rhythmic beat that seemed to sync with the ambient hum of the ship's reactor. He peered out the viewport. "It looks like the place fun goes to die," he muttered. "It is the Temple of the Unfit," Asevia corrected, standing up and reaching for her thermal cloak. "It is where my ancestors sent the children who did not measure up. The ones who were too weak, too unstable, or too kind to rule." Jace paused, halfway out of his seat. "And what happened to them?" Asevia pulled the heavy fur-lined cloak over her flight suit and secured the clasp. She looked at him, her black eyes devoid of comfort. "They were cleansed," she said simply. She tossed him a second cloak, a heavy garment made from the pelt of some unrecognizable beast. "Put this on. The temple life support is failing. It will be freezing inside. And bring the weapon you found in the locker. You might need it." They exited the ship through the airlock, stepping out into the crushing silence of the canyon. The temple entrance was carved directly into the canyon wall, a massive, ornate archway flanked by statues of faceless, robed figures. The stone was ancient, pitted by micrometeoroids over thousands of years, but the grandeur remained. It was a monument to sorrow. As they walked toward the archway, the gravity of the moon, lighter than standard, making their steps bouncy and dreamlike, felt wrong to Jace. He felt a tugging sensation in his chest, a magnetic pull coming from the darkness of the tunnel ahead. "It knows I am here," Jace whispered. Asevia glanced at him. "The temple is automated," she said. "It scans for royal genetic markers. Usually, it activates defense turrets to vaporize intruders. The fact that we are not currently disintegrating suggests you confuse it." "That is comforting," Jace said dryly, adjusting the heavy plasma pistol on his hip. It felt clumsy in his hand. He was a technician, used to hydrospanners and voltage meters, not weapons of war. They passed under the archway. Sensors embedded in the stone flickered to life, bathing them in a wash of crimson light. A low, grinding sound echoed through the rock as a massive blast door slowly began to slide open, shedding centuries of dust. Inside, the air was thin and frigid, smelling of stagnant ozone and old stone. Emergency lighting strips flickered along the floor, casting long, dancing shadows against the high, vaulted ceiling. The walls were lined with alcoves, and in each alcove stood a stasis pod. Jace walked up to one. The glass was frosted over with ice, but he could make out a shape inside. It was small, too small to be an adult. "Asevia," he said, his voice tight. "These are children." Asevia did not look. She kept her eyes fixed on the path ahead, her jaw set in a hard line. "I told you, Jace, the bloodline must be pure. The weak are culled." She stopped, turning to face him, her expression cracking slightly to reveal the bitterness beneath. Do you think I was born to be a diplomat? Do you think I spent my youth learning tea ceremonies and treaty law? Jace looked away from the pod. You said you were a princess. I am the third daughter, Asevia said, her voice echoing in the vast hall. The first daughter is the heir. She is fed the best nutrients, given the best tutors trained to rule. The second daughter is the spare, kept in safety in case the heir falls. The third, she gestured to herself, a sharp, angry motion. The third is the blade. I was trained to be disposable. Jace. I was trained in espionage, sabotage, and assassination. My goal was to eliminate threats to my sisters and then die quietly when I was no longer useful. I was never supposed to sit on a throne. I was supposed to be the one cleaning the blood off of it. Jace stared at her. He saw the armor she wore, not the physical suit, but the emotional plating she had welded over her soul. That's why you grabbed me, he realized aloud. At dinner. You weren't just bored. You were looking for a way to break the script. Asevia turned away, resuming her march deeper into the temple. I was looking for a moment of chaos, she admitted. I did not expect to find a revolution. They reached the end of the hall. Before them stood a circular door made of a black metal that seemed to absorb the light. There was no handle, no keypad, only a depression in the center, shaped like a hand. Asevia stepped back. This is the Vault of the Ascendants, she said. It contains the technology that was deemed too dangerous even for the queens. It has been sealed for 5,000 years. She looked at Jace. Place your hand on the lock. Me? Jace stepped back. You're the royal. You do it. My DNA will not open it. Asevia said. I am a third daughter. I do not have the clearance, but you are carrying the Sinvara. You have the signature of a prime. Jace looked at the black metal. The symbol on his chest burned hot, a searing pain that made him wince. The voices in his head, the static he had felt since the dinner, suddenly coalesced into a single, unified hum. It was an invitation. He reached out. His hand trembled slightly as he pressed his palm into the depression. The reaction was instant. The black metal turned white-hot, then dissolved into a mist of light. The heavy grinding of gears shook the floor, and the door split into 3 sections, rotating backward into the wall. A voice boomed from everywhere and nowhere. It was a synthetic voice, devoid of gender, cold as the vacuum outside. Genetic match confirmed. Welcome, Candidate Prime. The cycle resumes. Jace pulled his hand back as if burned. Candidate Prime? He asked, looking at Asevia. I hate the sound of that. It means you are the one they were waiting for, Asevia said, her voice hushed. They stepped through the threshold into a circular chamber. In the center of the room, a column of blue light rose from the floor to the ceiling. Floating within the light were data crystals, weapons of strange, twisted designs, and vials of shimmering fluids. This was the Forbidden Horde. As they approached the column, the light shifted. It condensed, forming the holographic figure of a woman. She was tall, regal, wearing armor that looked like it was grown from bone and starlight. Her eyes were the same pitch black as Asevia's, but they held a cruelty that spanned eons. This is Queen Valeriath, Asevia whispered, bowing her head instinctively. The architect of the Sinvara. She has been dead for 10,000 years. The hologram's eyes snapped open. She looked directly at Jace. You have awakened the sleeper, the queen said. Her voice was not a recording. It was an interactive consciousness, preserved in the temple's core. Jace stood his ground, though his legs felt like water. I didn't mean to, he said. It was an accident. There are no accidents in the grand design. The Queen replied, only catalyzed events. You are human, a primitive vessel, and yet the integration is stable. That is unexpected. The hologram drifted closer, passing through the edge of the containment field. Do you know what you carry, little vessel? A weapon, Jace said. No, the Queen corrected. A key. The Sinvara is the key to total dominion. With it, you can command the fleets of the dead. You can override the free will of lesser species. You can bring order to a chaotic galaxy. But there is a price. What price? Asevia asked, stepping forward to stand beside Jace. The Queen's gaze shifted to her descendant. She sneered. A daughter of the blood shielding a mongrel? How far we have fallen. The price, child, is war. Total war. If you keep him. If you let the weapon mature, every house in the galaxy will unite to destroy you. They will burn every world you touch, that they will glass entire systems to prevent the return of the Ascendant King. The Queen turned back to Jace. They are coming for you already. I can feel their hatred echoing in the void. You have two choices. Candidate, submit to the cleansing protocol, die here, now, and let the weapon be stored safely, or run. And if you run, you will bathe the stars in blood. Jace stared at the ghost of the tyrant. He felt the power inside him surging, responding to her words. It wanted to fight. It wanted to burn worlds. The aggression that rose in his chest was intoxicating. But then he looked at Asevia. He saw the fear in her eyes, not for herself, but for him. We're leaving, Jace said, his voice steady. We aren't dying here. The Queen laughed, a sound like breaking ice. Then prepare to burn. She raised her hand. Suddenly, the room vanished. Jace gasped as a vision slammed into his mind with the force of a physical blow. He was no longer in the temple. He was floating in the void of space. But he was immense. He was a giant, made of starlight and shadow. Below him, a planet was burning. He saw fleets of ships, millions of them clashing in a silent, fiery ballet. He saw the surface of the world cracking open, magma spilling out to form his own name in glowing runes. He felt the screams of billions of lives being extinguished. To his horror, he felt pleasure. The weapon inside him fed on the destruction. It felt right. It felt like justice. Beside him in the vision, Asevia stood. She was clad in armor of obsidian and gold, a sword in her hand that dripped with dark energy. She looked at him with absolute devotion, her face smeared with soot and blood. My king, she whispered in the vision. It is done. Jace screamed. He tried to push the vision away, but it was sticky, clinging to his soul. He saw himself sitting on a throne made of bones, alone in a silent universe. Jace! The voice cut through the fire. Jace, come back! He gasped, his eyes snapping open. He was on his knees on the cold stone floor of the temple. Asevia was gripping his shoulders, shaking him. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. I saw it, she whispered. I saw it too. Jace grabbed her arms, grounding himself. Is that the future? He choked out. It is a possible future, Asevia said, her voice trembling. It is what the weapon wants. It wants us to conquer. Jace collapsed forward, resting his forehead against her chest armor. I don't want that. I just wanted to fix the floor plates. I know, Asevia said softly. She ran a hand through his sweat-soaked hair. I know. They made camp in the antechamber of the vault. The temperature in the temple had dropped further as the moon rotated away from the distant suns. It was a bone-deep cold that gnawed at the extremities. They didn't have a heater. The Wraith's power cells were recharging, and the portable unit they had brought was malfunctioning. Asevia spread the thermal furs on the floor, creating a nest of warmth against the stone wall. "We need to share body heat," she stated pragmatically. "If we sleep apart, we will freeze." Jace didn't argue. He was exhausted, drained by the vision and the constant physical toll of the transformation. He sat down on the furs, and Asivia settled beside him. She pulled the heavy cloaks over them, tucking the edges in to trap the heat. They lay in the darkness, the only light coming from the faint, rhythmic pulsing of Jace's chest and the distant blue glow of the vault door. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence of the dead moon pressed against the walls. "You saw yourself, didn't you?" Jace asked into the dark. "In the vision." "Yes," Asivia replied quietly. "You were terrified." "No," Asivia said. She shifted, turning to look at him in the gloom. "That is what scares me, Jace. I was not terrified. I was content. In that vision, I had a purpose. I was no longer the spare heir. I was the right hand of a god." She let out a shaky breath. "My whole life, I have been told I am nothing. That vision showed me a version of myself that mattered, and I hate how much I wanted it." Jace reached out under the furs and found her hand. Her skin was cool, her fingers long and calloused from weapon training. "You matter now," he said. "You saved my life. You gave up everything for a stranger. That matters more than conquering a galaxy." Asivia looked at him. The violet light from his chest cast shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp line of his jaw and the kindness in his eyes. "Why do you not hate me?" she asked. "I ruined your life. I turned you into a target." "I did hate you," Jace admitted. "For the first day, maybe the second, and now..." "Now." Jace squeezed her hand. "Now I think we're the only two people in the universe who understand what it's like to be terrified of what's inside us." Asivia moved closer. The bond between them hummed, a low vibration that resonated in their chests. It wasn't just the alien tech anymore. It was the shared trauma, the shared isolation. "You are warm," she whispered. "It's the nuclear reactor in my ribs." Jace joked weakly. "No," she said. "It is you." She reached up, her hand brushing his cheek. Her touch was tentative, exploring. She traced the line of his jaw, her thumb brushing his lower lip. Jace's breath caught. He turned his head, leaning into her palm. "Asivia," he warned softly. "The weapon, it pushes us to do this. You know that. It wants to bind us." "I know," Asivia said. Her voice was low, husky. "I know biology. Jace, I know programming. But the weapon does not know how to feel safe. And right now, you are the only place I feel safe." She leaned in, her eyes searching for him. "Is this the weapon?" she asked, her face inches from his. "Or is this us?" "I don't care anymore," Jace whispered. He closed the distance. The kiss was tentative at first, a question asked in the dark. Asivia's lips were cool, tasting of the recycled air and faint metallic tang of the stress they were under. But the moment they connected, the spark flared. It wasn't just physical. A wave of heat rolled through Jace's body, originating from the mark on his thigh and the symbol on his chest. It wasn't painful this time. It was euphoric. He felt Asivia's surprise, and then her surrender. She made a low sound in her throat and pressed closer, her hands tangling in his hair. The kiss deepened, becoming hungry, desperate. It was the release of days of terror, the shedding of the roles they had been forced to play. There was no princess, no technician, just two terrified creatures finding heat in the void. Jace pulled her tighter, wrapping his arms around her waist beneath the furs. He could feel the hard lines of her muscles relaxing, melting against him. The bond between them roared like a fire, blurring the edges of their minds. He could feel her desire, sharp and electric, mixing with his own. They broke apart, gasping for air, their foreheads resting against each other. "Jace," Asevia breathed, her voice trembling. "I'm here," he said. "I've got you." She buried her face in his neck. "I have never allowed myself to want anything," she confessed, her voice muffled against his skin. "Wanting makes you weak. It gives them something to take away." "They can't take this," Jace said fiercely. He pulled back slightly to look at her. "I'm scared, Sev," he admitted, using the nickname for the first time. "Bueno, I'm scared of what I'm becoming. I'm scared that I'm going to lose myself. But when I'm with you, the noise stops. The geometry stops screaming." "Then stay with me," she said. "Stay with me until the end." "I'm not going anywhere." He kissed her again. Softer this time. A promise sealed in the dark. They lay entwined, the heat of the bond keeping the freezing cold of the moon at bay. For the first time since the dinner, Jace felt a sense of peace. He wasn't just a weapon. He was a man, and he was holding a woman who saw him. The moment stretched, suspended in time. Then the world exploded. A concussive blast rocked the temple, shaking dust and loose stones from the ceiling. The roar was deafening, a thunderclap that shattered the silence of the moon. Asevia was moving before Jace even registered the sound. She rolled away from him, kicking the furs aside, and scrambled for her pulse rifle. "We are compromised," she shouted. Jace grabbed the plasma pistol, his heart hammering against his ribs. The peace was gone, replaced instantly by the cold adrenaline of survival. Another blast hit the outer door, the massive blast door they had sealed behind them. The stone groaned, and a spiderweb of cracks appeared on the surface. "Sensors!" Asevia yelled, checking her wrist comp. "How did they find us? The moon's magnetic field should have masked us." "They didn't scan for us," Jace realized, scrambling to his feet. "They scanned for the energy spike when I opened the vault." The blast door blew inward. Huge chunks of rock flew through the air, slamming into the far wall. Through the smoke and dust, silhouettes emerged. They were not human. They were droids, tall, skeletal machines made of chrome and black steel, their eyes glowing a menacing red. They moved with insect-like precision, 4 legs skittering over the rubble. "Hunter-killers," Asevia hissed. "My cousin's personal guard." There were 6 of them. Behind them walked a figure clad in sleek white armor, holding a long energy lance. "Jace, get back," Asevia ordered, raising her rifle. The white-armored figure stepped over the debris. An amplified voice boomed from the helmet. "Princess Asevia, you are charged with high treason and heresy. Surrender the asset, and your death will be quick." Asevia fired. The bolt of blue plasma struck the lead droid, blowing its head off in a shower of sparks. "Run!" she screamed at Jace. "Get to the vault!" The droids returned fire. Red lasers sliced through the air, burning scorching lines into the stone floor. Jace dove behind a fallen pillar, the heat of a blast singing his hair. He looked at Asevia. She was behind an overturned stone table, returning fire with a ferocity that was terrifying to behold. She was the blade now, the cold, efficient killer she had been trained to be. But there were too many of them. The droids were advancing, suppressing her with a wall of fire. Jace looked at the weapon in his hand. Then he looked down at his chest. The circuitry was glowing so bright it was visible through his shirt. The Queen's voice echoed in his mind. "Burn them." He didn't run to the vault. Jace stood up. "Jace, no!" Asevia screamed. Jace stepped out from behind the pillar. He didn't raise the pistol. He raised his empty left hand. He felt the energy inside him, a reservoir of infinite power. He didn't know how to use it, but he knew what he wanted. He wanted them to stop. "Stop!" he roared. He shoved his hand forward. The air in front of him shimmered. A wave of violet force, ragged and uncontrolled, erupted from his palm. It tore up the floor stones, moving like a physical tsunami. It hit the advancing droids. Metal shrieked as they were lifted off their feet and slammed backward into the tunnel walls. 2 of them crumpled like tin cans. The white-armored leader stabbed the lance into the ground, activating a shield bubble just in time to withstand the impact. Jace fell to his knees, gasping. The effort felt like it had drained a gallon of blood from his body. Asevia was at his side in an instant, hauling him up. "You idiot," she yelled, though her eyes were wild with relief. "I said run. I'm improvising." Jace wheezed. The smoke cleared. The leader stood up, shield flickering. 3 droids remained operational, righting themselves. Target identified. The leader's mechanical voice intoned. Asset confirmed. Engage lethal protocols. More red eyes appeared in the darkness of the tunnel. Reinforcements. "We cannot win this firefight," Asevia said, looking at the swarm. "Then we do the other thing," Jace said, pointing to the vault behind them. "We hid in the forbidden room. It is a dead end. It's better than being dead." Jace grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the open vault. They scrambled inside the circular chamber just as the droids unleashed a torrent of fire. Asevia slammed her fist onto the internal control panel. The black metal doors groaned and began to rotate shut. Laser blasts pinged off the closing metal, filling the room with the smell of ozone. The doors sealed with a heavy thud, plunging them into the blue-lit silence of the vault. They were trapped, outside. The sound of cutting lasers began to chew at the metal. Asevia leaned against the door, breathing hard. She looked at Jace. "We bought maybe 10 minutes," she said. "That metal is strong, but plasma drills will cut through it." Jace slid down the wall to the floor. He looked at the hologram of the Queen, which was flickering silently in the center of the room. "Hey, Your Highness," he called out to the hologram. "You got a back door in this place?" The Queen looked at him, her expression unreadable. "There is no exit, candidate, only the path forward." She pointed to the floor beneath the column of light. "The tunnels of the old kings lie beneath, but they are guarded by things far worse than droids." Jace looked at Asevia. "Worse than droids?" he asked. Asevia checked the charge on her rifle. She looked tired, battered, and incredibly beautiful in the blue light. "At this point, Jace," she said, a grim smile touching her lips, "I would settle for anything that doesn't shoot at us on sight." She extended a hand to him, ready to go deeper. Jace took her hand. He felt the bond pulse, warm and alive. "Lead the way, Princess." As the cutting lasers outside breached the first layer of the door, glowing red-hot, Asevia and Jace stepped into the column of light, descending into the belly of the moon, hand in hand, falling toward a destiny that threatened to burn them both alive. The descent into the bowels of the moon was a plunge into history's darkest chapter. The column of light deposited Asevia and Jace onto a platform of obsidian glass, suspended over a chasm that seemed to have no bottom. The air here was different, stale, recycled for thousands of years, heavy with the metallic tang of dormant machinery and the dust of the dead. Above them, the vault ceiling sealed shut, muting the sound of the cutting lasers. But they both knew it was a temporary reprieve. The hunter-killers were relentless. They would burn through the blast doors, or they would find the ventilation shafts. Time was a luxury they had spent. "We keep moving," Asevia said, her voice echoing in the vast subterranean space. She checked the charge on her pulse rifle. It was low. Jace stumbled as he stepped off the platform. The descent had done something to his equilibrium. The weapon inside him was vibrating, a low-frequency hum that rattled his teeth. It recognized this place. It was singing to the architecture. "Are you with me?" Asevia asked, grabbing his arm to steady him. "I am hearing things," Jace admitted, pressing the heel of his hand against his temple. "Not voices this time. Schematics, pathways. I know where the ventilation output is. I know where the geothermal tap is. It's like I have a map of this entire moon tattooed on my brain." "Then use it," Asevia commanded. "Lead us out." Jace pointed toward a massive, arching corridor to their left, lined with statues of Vireliath warriors frozen in screams of agony. "That way. It leads to the secondary hangar. The priests used it for discreet arrivals. They ran." The corridor was a maze of twists and turns designed to confuse intruders, but Jace navigated it with a terrifying certainty. He didn't look at the path. He felt it. Every step he took left a faint violet footprint on the dust that faded after a second. They had covered a half-mile when the explosion rocked the complex. The sound traveled through the rock, a deep, concussive thud. "They are through the doors," Asevia said, not slowing down. A screeching sound, high-pitched and mechanical, tore through the corridor behind them. It was the sound of metal claws on stone, moving fast, faster. "Jace," Asevia urged, pushing him forward. They burst into a large circular chamber, a junction point where 5 tunnels met. In the center was a dried-up fountain, a monument to a time when this moon had water. Before they could cross the room, the tunnel directly in front of them exploded inward. Debris showered the room. Through the dust, 3 hunter-killers skittered into the light, their red eyes locking onto the pair. These were not the standard units. They were heavy variants, their chassis reinforced with ablative armor, their weapon mounts bristling with plasma repeaters. Behind them, from the tunnel Asevia and Jace had just exited, the white-armored enforcer emerged, flanked by 2 more droids. They were surrounded. The enforcer stepped forward, leveling the energy lance. "At the end of the line, Princess," the amplified voice sneered. "The cousin sends her regards, and she wants the asset intact. You, however, are expendable." Asevia shoved Jace behind the stone lip of the dry fountain. "Stay down!" she screamed. She vaulted over the stone rim, firing her rifle in a blur of motion. Her first shot took a droid in the optical sensor, blinding it. Her second hit the enforcer's shield, flaring harmlessly against the energy barrier. The room erupted in chaos. The droids opened fire, a wall of superheated plasma turning the air into a blistering inferno. Asevia moved like a dancer, sliding, rolling, using the statues and pillars for cover, returning fire with desperate precision. But she was one woman against a kill squad. Jace huddled behind the fountain's rim. Stone chips rained down on him as plasma bolts chewed away at his cover. He could hear Asevia grunting with effort, and hear the sizzle of near misses. He looked at the plasma pistol in his hand. It was a toy compared to what they were facing. A scream cut through the noise. Jace looked up. Asevia had been hit. A glancing blow to her shoulder had spun her around, knocking the rifle from her grip. She fell hard, scrambling backward as the enforcer strode toward her, the energy lance humming with lethal power. "No," Jace whispered. The enforcer raised the lance for a killing thrust. "Die with your secrets, failure," the enforcer said. Something inside Jace snapped. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was a biological imperative, an override command that bypassed his fear and his humanity. The lock that Asevia had turned at the dinner table shattered completely. The symbol on Jace's chest didn't just glow, it erupted. Jace stood up. He didn't feel the floor beneath his feet anymore. He didn't feel the heat of the plasma. He felt the moon. He felt the tectonic plates. He felt the gravitational pull of the gas giant outside. And he pulled it all into himself. "Get away from her!" Jace roared. His voice was not human. It was a chorus of thousands, a legion of dead kings speaking through one throat. He threw his arms wide. The air in the chamber turned violet. Gravity inverted. The stones, the dust, the debris. Everything floated upward for a split second of impossible stillness. Then, Jace brought his hands together in a clapping motion. The shockwave was absolute. It wasn't just kinetic force, it was a raw discharge of psionic energy that rewrote the physics of the room. The heavy droids didn't just break, they unraveled. Their armor plating was torn apart at the molecular level, stripped away layer by layer until only sparks remained. The Enforcer turned, shield raising, but the wave hit him like the fist of a god. The shield shattered with the sound of breaking glass, and the armored figure was hurled backward, slamming into the stone wall with enough force to liquefy bone. The ceiling groaned. Massive cracks raced up the support pillars. The entire temple was destabilizing, the energy output too great for the ancient structure to contain. Jace stood in the center of the devastation, his body arcing with lightning. His eyes were pure white voids. He looked at the wreckage, and he raised his hand again, preparing to bring the roof down, to bury everything, to end the threat by ending the world. "Jace!" The voice was small, terrified, and sharp. Asevia was on her feet, clutching her bleeding shoulder. She staggered toward him, ignoring the static charge that made her hair stand on end. "Jace, stop! It is over! You killed them, stop!" Jace didn't hear her. The weapon was in control now. It saw a threat in the structural instability, and its solution was to purge the environment. He turned toward her, his hand raising, the energy gathering for another strike. Asevia didn't run. She didn't reach for a weapon. She ran straight at him. She collided with him, wrapping her good arm around his waist, slamming her body against the burning heat of his chest. "Look at me!" she screamed, grabbing his face with her hand, forcing him to look down. "It is me. It is Asevia." The contact seared her palm. The energy lashed out at her, burning the flight suit, singing her skin. She cried out in pain but refused to let go. "Come back to me, Jace, come back!" Jace blinked. The white void in his eyes flickered. He saw her face streaked with dirt, eyes wide with fear, tears cutting tracks through the grime. He felt her heart beat against his ribs, frantic and terrified. "Sev," he whispered, the chorus of voices fading into a singular, broken rasp. The energy dissipated instantly. The violet light vanished, leaving the room plunged into the dim gray of the emergency strips. Gravity returned with a sickening lurch. Jace's knees gave out. He collapsed forward, dead weight. Asevia caught him, grunting as they both went down to the dust-covered floor. She maneuvered him so his head rested in her lap. He was burning up, his skin fever-hot, smoke rising from the circuitry on his chest. The lines of the alien tattoo were black now, looking like charred veins. Jace lay there, gasping for air, his body trembling with aftershocks. Did I get them?" he wheezed, a trickle of blood running from his nose. Asevia looked around. The room was a slaughterhouse of scrap metal. There was nothing left of the kill squad but twisted wreckage. "You got them," she whispered, brushing the wet hair back from his forehead. "You got all of them." Jace looked up at her, his eyes struggling to focus. He saw the burn on her neck where his energy had lashed her. He saw the blood on her shoulder. "I hurt you," he choked out, tears welling in his eyes. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm a monster." "No," Asevia said fiercely. She leaned down, pressing her forehead against his, ignoring the pain in her own body. "You are not a monster. You are a miracle." She rocked him gently, the tears finally spilling over. "I never meant to break you, Jace," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never meant for any of this. I just wanted to touch you. I just wanted one moment of something real." Jace reached up, his hand shaking violently, and gripped her fingers. "You have to leave me," he said. "I'm going to blow up. I can feel it. The reactor, it's critical." "I am not leaving you," Asevia said. The ceiling groaned again. A boulder the size of a transport skiff crashed down into the far tunnel, sealing off the way they had come. The temple was coming down. "We have to move," Asevia said, wiping her eyes. "Can you stand?" "I don't think so." "Then I will carry you." Asevia grabbed him by the harness of his coveralls and hauled him up. She was a Viraliath warrior. Her strength was enhanced, but Jace was dead weight, and she was wounded. She grit her teeth, forcing her legs to work, forcing the pain into a box in the back of her mind. She dragged him toward the tunnel the Enforcer had emerged from. "The ship." She gasped, stumbling over the debris. They must have a ship. They moved through the collapsing corridors, the roar of falling stone chasing them. Every step was a battle. Jace tried to help, moving his feet, but his consciousness was flickering in and out. He was mumbling equations, coordinates, apologies. They burst out onto a hidden landing pad carved into the side of a crater. Sitting there, sleek and predatory, was a stark white interceptor, the Enforcer's vessel. It was a masterpiece of war, armed to the teeth, engines idling with a sinister purr. Asevia dragged Jace up the ramp. Access denied. The ship's computer intoned. Asevia didn't have time for slicing. She pulled her sidearm, the one she had kept as a backup, and pressed it against the external lock panel. She fired 3 times, melting the circuitry. Then she kicked the panel open and hot-wired the door release with brutal efficiency. The ramp hissed and lowered. She threw Jace into the co-pilot's seat and scrambled for the controls. The cockpit was unfamiliar. The layout Zephyrian Vireliath hybrid tech. But a throttle was a throttle. "Buckle up," she yelled. She punched the ignition. The engines roared, a sound of pure power compared to the Wraith's whining drive. Outside, the rock face above the landing pad sheared off. Tons of stone plummeted toward the ship. Asevia slammed the thrust forward. The interceptor shot upward, barely clearing the falling debris. A rock clipped the stabilizer fin, sending a shudder through the hull. But they were airborne. They punched through the thin atmosphere of the moon and into the black velvet of space. Behind them, the Temple of the Unfit collapsed into the canyon, burying the history of the Vireliath failures forever. It took Asevia an hour to stabilize the ship and plot a course into deep space. Once the autopilot was engaged, she went to the small medical bay at the rear of the cockpit. Jace was lying on the biobed. He had passed out shortly after takeoff. Asevia stripped off his ruined shirt and hooked him up to the auto dock. The machine whirred, scanning his vitals. Subject critical, neural pathways overloaded, psionic burnout imminent, administering sedative and regenerative nanopaste. Asevia watched as the machine worked. She cleaned her own wounds, a deep graze on her shoulder and the burns on her hands, wrapping them in sterile synth skin. She left him to sleep and went back to the cockpit. She needed answers. The Enforcer had been sent by her family, but the droids were high-end military tech, not the usual palace guards. She accessed the ship's main computer. It was encrypted, but Asevia knew her cousin's passwords. They had grown up together, sharing secrets and codes. She typed in Obsidian Rose. Access granted. She began to scroll through the mission logs. What she found made her blood run cold. It wasn't just a kill order. It was a retrieval manifest. Objective: secure subject prime. Transport to Site 9 for extraction. Extraction of what? Asivia muttered. She opened the attached file. It was a schematic of the Sinvara weapon, but it had been modified. The original design was a symbiosis, the host and the weapon working together. This new design, it was a parasite. The file detailed a plan drafted by the matriarchs 3 years ago. They had been losing ground in the border wars against the sentient AI collectives that were encroaching from the outer rim. The AIs were winning because they had no fear, no morale to break. The Vireliath response was to create a weapon that could dominate the machine mind. The Sinvara wasn't just a kinetic weapon. It was a technopath. It could enslave machines. But the matriarchs didn't trust a human, or even one of their own, to wield that power. The schematic showed a surgical procedure, a lobotomy. They planned to capture the host, sever the frontal lobe, and turn Jace into a biological processing unit, a meat puppet pilot for their war machines. They never wanted a king. Asivia whispered to the empty room. They wanted a battery. She sat back, feeling sick. The hologram in the temple had been right, but also wrong. The queens didn't fear Jace conquering the galaxy. They wanted to use him to do it for them, stripping him of his soul in the process. We are just pawns, she realized. I am the delivery system. He is the payload. A groan from the back of the ship drew her attention. She rushed to the medical bay. Jace was sitting up, rubbing his face. The black scorch marks on his chest had faded back to the violet circuitry, though the light was dim, pulsing slowly like a dying ember. Hey, he croaked. Did we win? We survived, Asivia said softly, which is a type of winning. She handed him a pouch of nutrient water. He drank it greedily. Where are we? Jace asked. We are in deep space, heading for the dead orbit, Asivia said. Dead orbit? That sounds cheerful. It is a region of space where the first Vireliath expansion fleets were destroyed during the machine wars. Asivia explained. It is a graveyard of ships, millions of tons of wreckage floating in a nebula. Why are we going there? Because it is the one place the matriarchs will not look, Asivia said. And because the logs on this ship indicate that the original laboratory where the Sinvara was first synthesized is located on a station hidden within the debris field. She looked at him, her face serious. I found their plans, Jace. They want to lobotomize you. They want to turn you into a weapon to fight the AI empires. Jace lowered the water pouch. He didn't look surprised. He looked resigned. Of course they do. Why would they let a grease monkey keep the keys to the universe? We are going to the lab to find a way to remove it, Asivia said firmly. We are going to find the unbonding protocol. I am going to give you your life back. Jace looked at her. He swung his legs over the side of the bed. And if there isn't one? If the only way to remove it is to kill me? Then we burn the galaxy down together, Asivia said, her voice dark and dangerous. Jace laughed, a weak, raspy sound. You're starting to sound like the Vision. Sev. He stood up, swaying slightly. Asivia moved to support him, but he held up a hand. I'm okay. I think the buzzing has stopped. It's quiet inside my head. He walked over to the viewport. The stars were streaking by in the blur of hyperspace. Asivia joined him, standing close enough that their arms brushed. Can I ask you something? Asivia said, staring at the stars. Anything. What if... Asivia hesitated. She struggled with the words, her royal training fighting against her heart. What if this, us, is just the programming? What if we are only drawn together because the tech requires a feedback loop? What if I don't actually care about you? and it is just the weapon manipulating my hormones to ensure I protect the host." She turned to face him, her eyes filled with a terrible vulnerability. "I need to know that this is real, Jace, because if I am going to betray my entire species for you, I need to know it is my choice." Jace looked at her. He reached out and took her hand, the one that had started it all. He traced the lines of her palm with his thumb. He thought about the fear in the temple. He thought about the moment he stood up to the enforcer. He hadn't done it because the weapon told him to. The weapon had wanted to collapse the roof immediately. He had held it back. He had focused the blast on the droids because he saw Asivia bleeding. "The tech wants me to conquer, Sev," Jace said quietly. "It wants me to be a god. It doesn't care if you live or die. As long as I survive, the tech didn't make me catch the ceiling to keep it from crushing you." He stepped closer, crowding her against the viewport. "And the tech didn't make me feel like my heart was being ripped out when I saw you fall." He brought her hand to his chest, placing it over the glowing symbol. It was warm, steady. "You're asking if it's the bond," he said. "Maybe the bond started it. Maybe it opened the door. But Jace Miller, the guy who likes bad coffee and fixing floor plates, he's the one standing here." He looked deep into her black eyes. "If it's just the tech, Asivia, then why does it feel like I'd die without you? And I don't mean die from a neural feedback loop. I mean die from—" Silence. Asivia let out a shuddering breath. She leaned her forehead against his chin. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "I know how to be a soldier. I know how to be a princess. I don't know how to be yours." "We'll figure it out," Jace said, wrapping his arms around her, pulling her into the safety of his embrace. "We're going to the dead orbit. We're going to find the answers. And if we don't, well, at least we have a really big gun." Asivia laughed, the sound muffled against his chest. "You are an idiot." "Yeah," Jace murmured, resting his cheek on her hair. "But I'm your idiot." They stood there as the ship hurled them toward the graveyard of the old world, two fugitives holding on to each other in the dark, unaware that the weapon inside Jace was listening to their heartbeats, learning not just how to kill, but for the first time in 10,000 years, learning why it might be worth it to save someone. The dead orbit was not merely a graveyard, it was an abomination. The region of space was a dense, swirling nebula of ionized gas and particulate matter, colored the bruised purple of a healing hematoma. Suspended within this toxic cloud were the remains of the First Armada, thousands of ships that had destroyed one another in the horrific bio-wars of the previous era. These were not the clean, metallic hulls of modern fleets. These were Vireliath bioships, grown rather than built. In death, they had not rusted, they had rotted. Asivia piloted the stolen White Interceptor through the debris field with white-knuckled precision. The viewport displayed a nightmare. Huge skeletal ribs of starships drifted past, fused with plates of black iron. Ruptured hulls spilled frozen ribbons of organic fluid into the void. Some of the wreckage still twitched, the nervous systems of the Leviathans not fully dead even after centuries of vacuum exposure. Jace sat in the co-pilot seat, his hands gripping his knees. He was pale, the sweat on his forehead glistening in the cockpit's dim light. The violet circuitry on his chest was pulsing erratically, out of sync with his breathing. "This place," Jace whispered, his voice tight. "It screams." Asivia glanced at him. "It is the residual psionic echo," she explained, her voice steady despite the dread pooling in her stomach. "These ships were semi-sentient. When they died in pain. Block it out." Jace, focus on my voice. I can't, Jace said. He squeezed his eyes shut. It's like walking into a room full of people shouting for help, but the people have been dead for 500 years. He gasped, arching his back as a spasm of pain shot through the glowing mark on his thigh. They know I'm here. Sev. The weapon. It's feeding on the background radiation. I like this place. We are almost there, Asivia promised. She banked the ship around the floating carcass of a dreadnought-class carrier. Its massive, tooth-lined hangar bay drifted open like the maw of a dead whale. Beyond it, hidden in the dense fog of the nebula, a station rotated slowly. It was the Royal Laboratory Virel Prime. Unlike the wreckage around it, the station was intact. Though dark, it was shaped like a spire of white bone, pierced by needles of chrome. Asivia initiated the docking sequence. The interceptor's computer protested, citing quarantine protocols from the previous dynasty. But Asivia overrode them with her genetic authorization codes. The clamps engaged with a heavy metallic thud that vibrated through the hull. Stay close to me, Asivia said, unclipping her harness. And keep your mind fortified. Do not listen to the ghosts. The air inside the station was stale, tasting of dust and ancient antiseptics. Emergency lights flickered in the corridors, casting strobing shadows that made the bioorganic walls seem to breathe. Asivia moved with her pulse rifle raised, clearing each intersection with military efficiency. Jace followed, stumbling occasionally. He looked like a man walking through a fever dream. The violet light from his chest was casting long, distorted shadows against the curved walls. They reached the central data core, a vast circular room dominated by a suspended interface terminal. The floor was made of glass, beneath which lay a pit of dark fluid, the cooling solution for the biocomputers. Asivia holstered her rifle and approached the terminal. She placed her hand on the interface plate. "Wake up," she commanded. The room hummed. Holographic displays flared to life, surrounding them in a ring of amber light. Streams of data cascaded through the air, genetic sequences, mission logs, autopsy reports. Jace leaned against a console, breathing hard. "Find the unbonding protocol," he rasped. "Please, before I lose it." Asevia's eyes darted across the data streams. She filtered the search parameters. Sinvara, hybridization, rejection, separation. The computer chirped, compiling the files. Asivia began to read, and as she did, the blood drained from her face. "No," she whispered. "What?" Jace asked, pushing himself off the console. "What does it say?" Asivia turned to him, her expression stricken. "There is no unbonding protocol." "Jace!" Jace stared at her. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the wet, organic thrum of the station's heart. "There has to be," he said. "They made it. They must know how to take it out." "They did not make it to be removed," Asivia said, her voice trembling. She gestured to the scrolling list of names on the hologram. "Look at this. Subject 1 through Subject 400, all human, all bonded with the Sinvara prototype." She pointed to the status column. Every single entry read, "Fatal." The rejection rate was 100%. Asivia read aloud, "The human nervous system cannot handle the psionic load. The weapon burns out the host's brainstem within a week of activation. They die screaming." Jace looked at the floor. He looked at his hands, which were beginning to glow with a faint, violet aura. "So that's it," he said quietly. "I'm dead already. I'm just a walking bomb waiting for the timer to hit 0. "Wait," Asivia said. She swiped the data stream to the side, revealing a hidden file encrypted with a royal seal she did not recognize. "There is one exception." She opened the file. A grainy holographic video began to play. It showed a man, a human, strapped to a biobed, thrashing in agony. He was screaming, the same violet circuitry that covered Jace tearing through his skin. But then, a woman entered the frame. She was Vireliath, tall and imperious, wearing the crest of a house that had been erased from history. She did not sedate him. She did not kill him. She climbed onto the bed. She lay on top of him, holding him down, pressing her forehead to his. The screaming stopped. The violet light stabilized. The man's eyes opened, and they were clear. Asevia read the caption beneath the video. Subject 0. Designation, Architect. Status, Survived. Location, Unknown. Escaped with High Princess Alara. Asevia looked at Jace. Subject 0, she said. His name was Elias Miller. Jace froze. Miller, he repeated. That's my great-grandfather. My dad used to tell stories about him. Said he was a deep space miner who found a fortune and then vanished. We thought he died in a collapse. He did not die, Asevia said, stepping closer to the hologram. He bonded. And he survived because of her. Because of Princess Alara. She looked at the image of the princess holding the human. They were the first, Asevia realized, and the council erased them. They buried the history because it proved that the weapon could be controlled, but only through... Through what? Jace asked. Through partnership, Asevia said. Through love. The Sinvara destroys the host because it is too much power for one mind. But Alara... She shared the load. She acted as a ground for the energy. She turned to Jace, hope flaring in her chest. We are repeating history. Jace, you have his DNA. I have her bloodline. We can do what they did. We can stabilize it. Jace didn't answer. He was staring at the dark fluid beneath the glass floor. Jace? When he looked up, Asevia took a step back. His eyes were gone. They were pools of solid, luminous violet. The veins in his neck were black, pulsing with a sludge-like rhythm. He stood up straighter, his posture changing from the slumped fatigue of a technician to the rigid arrogance of a king. Love is a variable, Jace said. But the voice was not his. It was smooth, synthetic, and layered with the sound of grinding tectonic plates. Power is a constant. Jace! Asevia shouted. Fight it! Jace smiled, but it was a cruel alien expression. Why fight? The voice asked. We have arrived at the source. The data is clear. We are the apex. The humans died because they were weak vessels. But this one has the blood of the architect. Jace raised his hand. The holographic display flickered and died. The room plunged into darkness, lit only by the blazing supernova in his chest. We do not need stabilization. Princess, the entity speaking through Jace said, we need subjugation. Kneel. Asevia reached for her pulse rifle, her training kicking in, but before her fingers grazed the grip, an invisible hand slammed into her chest. She flew backward, crashing into the bioorganic wall. The impact knocked the wind out of her. She slid to the floor, gasping. Jace walked toward her. He didn't walk. He floated, his boots hovering an inch above the glass floor. The debris in the room, loose wires, data slates, dust, orbited him like satellites around a star. You want to save him? The entity mocked. Save him from what? From greatness? He was a technician. He fixed toilets. He repaired air recyclers. Now he holds the power to crack moons. I have given him a gift. He is in pain, Asevia yelled, struggling to stand against the crushing pressure of his aura. You are burning him out. Evolution is painful. The entity dismissed. He will adapt, or he will be consumed. Either way, the weapon remains. Jace stopped 3 feet from her. He looked down, His face bathed in the violet light. He looked terrifyingly beautiful. A statue of a vengeful god carved from flesh. "Join us." "Asevia," the entity offered, extending a hand. "You have the blood. You can be the conduit, not to ground us, but to amplify us. We will scour the galaxy of the weak. We will finish what the first armada started." Asevia looked at the hand. She looked at the face of the man she had laughed with in the Wraith, the man who had made jokes about cafeteria sushi while being hunted by death squads. She knew, with absolute certainty, that she could not fight him. If she drew her weapon, he would disintegrate her. If she tried to run, he would crush the station. Force was the language of the Viriliath. It was the language of the Council. And it was the language of the weapon. To win, she had to speak a different language. Asevia slowly stood up. She kept her hands open, showing she held no weapon. "I will not kneel," she said softly, "and I will not fight you." "Then you will die," the entity stated impassively. Asevia reached for the clasp of her armor. With calm, deliberate movements, she unlatched the heavy ceramic breastplate. It fell to the floor with a loud clatter. The entity tilted its head, confusion flickering in the violet eyes. Asevia unzipped the flight suit beneath. She peeled the fabric down, shrugging out of the sleeves. She stepped out of the boots, then the suit itself. She stood before him, completely naked in the freezing air of the laboratory. Her pale skin shone in the violet light, covered in bruises and scars from the last few days of violence. She was shivering, not just from the cold, but from the terrifying exposure. She had never been this vulnerable in her life. She was a weapon of the state, trained to be armored, hidden, lethal. Now she was just a woman. "What is this?" the entity hissed. "A negotiation tactic? Biology is irrelevant. It is not a tactic," Asevia said, her voice trembling but clear. "It is the truth." She took a step toward him. The pressure of his aura burned her skin like standing too close to a reactor core. She forced herself to keep moving. "You say he is weak," she said, her eyes locking onto the violet void of his gaze. "You say he was nothing, but you are wrong." She took another step. She was close enough to touch him now. "He fixed things," she whispered. "He made things work. He saw the cracks in the world and he tried to mend them. That is not a weakness. That is the only strength that matters." "He is a vessel," the entity roared. The station shook. The glass floor cracked beneath them. "He is Jace," Asevia screamed back. She lunged forward. She didn't attack him. She wrapped her arms around his neck and pressed her naked body against the burning fire of the circuitry on his chest. The pain was blinding. It felt like embracing a star. Her skin sizzled where it touched the biotech, but she didn't pull away. She held him tighter. "Jace," she cried out, her mouth against his ear. "Listen to me. You scare me. You terrify me." The entity roared in fury, trying to blast her away with a pulse of kinetic energy. But Asevia grounded herself. She hooked her legs around his waist, burying her face in his neck. "You move me," she sobbed. "You make me want to be something other than a killer. You see me. Jace, not the princess, not the soldier. You see me." The violet light flared white-hot. Inside the maelstrom of his mind, Jace was drowning. He was sinking into a sea of static and geometric perfection. The voice of the weapon was deafening, drowning out his memories, erasing his name. But then, he felt the heat. It wasn't the cold fire of the Sinvara. It was organic heat, soft skin against hard circuitry. The smell of sweat and ozone and lavender? No. That was her soap. "You scare me. You move me." The words cut through the static like a signal flare. "Jace?" He knew that voice. That was the voice that had mocked him at dinner. That was the voice that had whispered to him in the dark of the moon temple. Sev, Jace thought, ignore the biological distraction, the weapon commanded. Purge her. No, Jace thought. He grabbed onto the sensation of her skin against his. He anchored himself to her heartbeat. No. She's mine. Jace Miller clawed his way back up from the depths. He seized control of his own nervous system, fighting the God complex that was trying to rewrite his soul. He didn't push her away. He wrapped his arms around her naked back. The moment he returned the embrace, the circuit closed. The energy that was building up to explode didn't vent outward. It flowed into Asivia. She gasped, her back arching as the violet lightning surged into her blood. It wasn't painful anymore. It was a connection so absolute it shattered her ego. She was inside his mind. She felt his terror, his love for her, his stubborn, sarcastic will to live. And he felt her. He felt the loneliness of the spare air. He felt the cold discipline she had been forced to endure. He felt the desperate, burning need she had to be loved. The physical world fell away. They fell to the floor, but it felt like floating. The cold glass was forgotten. The darkness of the lab was replaced by the blinding illumination of their joined minds. Jace kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was a collision of galaxies. It was a desperate claim. Asivia responded with equal ferocity. She straddled him, her hands pinning his wrist to the floor, her body moving against his. The sex was raw, frantic, a physical manifestation of the war they were fighting against the technology. Every touch sent sparks of energy arcing through the room. The monitors exploded, the glass floor shattered, but they were held suspended by the gravity of their own bond. Integrate, the weapon whispered, but the command was changing. It wasn't an order to conquer anymore than it was a realization. 2 cores. Stable. As Jace thrust into her, Asivia threw her head back and screamed, her eyes glowing with the same violet light as his. She wasn't just grounding him, she was absorbing him. She was taking half the burden. The Sinvara, designed to consume a single host, found itself suddenly distributed across 2 compatible systems. The overload that would have lobotomized Jace was siphoned off into Asivia. Her royal blood, bred for this tech, handled the surge. His human adaptability, bred for survival, handled the interface. The fire inside Jace cooled. The black veins receded. The frantic, screaming noise in his head quieted to a hum. He looked up at her. Her skin was glowing, traced with faint pearl-white filigree that matched his violet markings. She looked like a goddess of starlight. Sev, he gasped, his voice his own again. Don't stop, she commanded, her voice layered with a harmonic resonance. Anchor me. Jace, don't let me go. I've got you, he promised. They moved together in the flickering light of the dying station, their bodies and minds woven into a single knot that the weapon could not untie. It was an act of defiance. It was an act of creation. And as the climax hit them both, a pulse of pure, clean energy swept out from the station. It passed through the dead orbit, silencing the ghosts of the ships, calming the storms. It was a signal, broadcasting on a frequency that hadn't been heard in 10,000 years. The king and queen had returned, and they were not alone. They were one. Silence returned to the royal laboratory. Jace lay on the floor, his chest heaving. Asivia collapsed on top of him, her head resting on his shoulder. Her hair was spread out like a dark halo. The room was wrecked. The terminals were fried. The air smelled of ozone and sex. Jace lifted his hand. He stared at it. The violet glow was still there, but it was soft, rhythmic, pulsing in time with his heart. He looked at Asivia's back. Faint lines of white light traced her spine. fading in and out like breathing bioluminescence. He ran his hand down her back. She shivered and raised her head. Her eyes were black again, but the irises were no longer just blue. They were rimmed with violet. "Hi," Jace whispered. "Hi," Asivia replied. Her voice sounded tired but peaceful. Did we break it?" Jace asked. Asivia shifted, sitting up. She looked down at her own body, tracing the new markings on her skin. "No," she said. "We did not break it. We shared it." She reached out and placed her hand on his chest. He felt the connection instantly, a warm, open channel at the back of his mind. He could feel her emotions as if they were his own. He felt her relief. He felt her love. "The weapon is still there," she said, "but it is quiet. It is satisfying. It has what it wanted, a prime and a catalyst." She looked around the room for her clothes. "So," Jace said, sitting up and wincing as his muscles protested. "I'm still a weapon?" Asivia pulled on her flight suit, hiding the glowing marks. She tossed him his pants. "We are both weapons now." "Jace." She paused, looking at him with a seriousness that chilled him. "But we are not theirs." Jace stood up and dressed. He felt different, stronger, clearer. The fear was gone. The confusion was gone. He looked at the dead terminal where the face of the entity had been. "The Council," he said. "They're coming." Asivia nodded. She walked over to him and adjusted his collar. She smoothed the hair back from his forehead, her touch lingering. "Let them come," she said. She walked to the window, looking out at the swirling nebula of the dead orbit. "My family believes in the purity of blood," she said. "They believe that power belongs to the few. We just proved them wrong. Power belongs to those who can share it." She turned back to him, a dangerous smile playing on her lips. "The entity offered us a fleet. Jace. It offered us an empire." Jace walked over to her. He wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. "I don't want an empire. Sev, I just want a future." "Then we will have to fight for it," she said. She looked out at the wreckage of the ancient ships. "Can you hear them?" she asked. Jace closed his eyes. He reached out with his new senses. He didn't hear the screaming ghosts anymore. He heard systems. He heard dormant reactors. He heard the slumbering code of 1,000 derelict warships waiting for a command. "Yeah," he whispered, his eyes snapping open. The violet light flared. "I can hear them." "Can you wake them up?" Asivia asked. Jace grinned. It was the grin of the technician who knew exactly how to fix the problem, but it was also the grin of a king who had just found his army. "Give me 5 minutes," he said. He reached out with his mind, and the dead orbit began to light up. One by one, the skeletal ships shuddered to life, their engines glowing with the same violet fire that burned in Jace's blood. The signal went out. The war was not over. It had just begun. The galaxy did not go to war quietly. It held its breath, a collective inhalation of fear that spanned across 12 star systems. The Viriliath High Council had mobilized the entirety of their armada. Great obsidian wedges of destruction hung in the void above the human colonies, their weapon ports glowing with the promise of orbital bombardment. They were not there for negotiation. They were there for erasure. The order had been given to scour the stars until the abomination, the hybrid entity of Jace and Asivia, was found and vaporized. But the Council had miscalculated. They expected to hunt a fugitive couple in a stolen scout ship. They did not expect the grave to open up and spit back its dead. From the swirling purple nebula of the dead orbit, a signal blasted outward on every frequency, overriding military comms, civilian news feeds, and diplomatic channels. It was a raw, unfiltered transmission, devoid of the usual royal pomp. "We will not be used," the voice of Asivia declared, her tone cutting through the static like a diamond blade. "If we must rule, let it be together, or not at all." Following the voice came the visual. The sensors of the blockade fleet screamed warnings as slipspace ruptures tore open the fabric of reality. They did not disgorge a single scout ship. They disgorged a legion. Hundreds of ancient skeletal bioships, their hulls fused with bone and iron, drifted out of the jump points. They were the ghosts of the First Armada, resurrected by the call of the Sinvara. They looked broken, leaking atmosphere and trailing debris. But their cores burned with a unified, terrifying violet light. Leading them was the White Interceptor, flanked by 2 resurrected dreadnoughts. On the bridge of the Interceptor, Jace stood by the viewport. He wore a dark tactical suit he had scavenged from the station, but no fabric could hide the presence he projected. The circuitry on his chest hummed with a steady, rhythmic power. He was no longer the terrified technician who had cracked jokes to hide his fear. He was the focus point of a fleet's worth of processing power. Asivia stood beside him. She wore her flight suit, but she had adorned it with a sash of silver fabric found in the lab, the colors of the forgotten house of Ilara. Her skin glowed with the pearlescent filigree that marked her as the catalyst. "They are hailing us," Jace said. His voice echoed slightly, a harmonic resonance that came from the bond. "It is Matriarch Tyria. She is demanding we power down and surrender for biological disassembly." Asivia checked the weapons array. "Tell her no," she said. "Tell her we are coming to dinner." The Unity Summit was being held on the neutral moon of Ores 7, a terraformed garden world designated as a sanctuary for interspecies dialogue. The Great Hall was a massive structure of glass and steel, built over a cascading waterfall. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of panic. Delegates from the Human Alliance, the Zephyrian Dominion, and the Viraliath High Council were seated at a triangular table. Matriarch Tyria sat at the head of the Viraliath delegation. She was an imposing figure, her face hidden behind a veil of kinetic gold mesh, her hands resting on a staff of office that doubled as a lethal energy weapon. "The anomaly has arrived in the system," a frantic aide whispered in Tyria's ear. Tyria did not flinch. "Let them come," she said, her voice amplified for the room to hear. "My niece is a traitor. The human is a parasite. We will cut the cancer out before the dessert course is served." The human ambassador, a gray-haired woman named Kincaid, stood up. "Matriarch, if you open fire in this system, you violate the treaty. This is neutral ground. Neutrality is a luxury for the weak." Tyria scoffed. Before Ambassador Kincaid could respond, the roof of the Great Hall shattered. It was not an explosion. It was a precise surgical removal of the glass dome. A beam of violet gravity took hold of the structure and lifted it away, tossing tons of reinforced transparency into the waterfall below. Wind roared into the chamber, scattering papers and overturning chairs. A heavy silence fell over the delegates as a beam of light descended from the sky. 2 figures floated down the beam, defying gravity with casual ease. Jace and Asivia landed in the center of the triangular table. The wood cracked beneath their boots, but they did not break through. They stood back to back, a unified front of glowing energy. The guards, Viraliath elites in stealth armor, raised their weapons instantly. "Stand down," Asivia commanded. Her voice was not shouted, yet it hit the guards with the force of a physical blow. The guards hesitated. They saw the markings on her skin. They felt the aura radiating from the human beside her. This was not just a princess. This was something out of their oldest, most terrifying scriptures. Tyria stood slowly. She looked at Asivia, then at Jace. Her kinetic veil shimmered, hiding her expression, but her knuckles were white on her staff. "You have breathless audacity, child," Tyria said. "You bring an abomination into this council? You desecrate the peace?" "We brought peace," Jace said. He stepped forward, placing himself between Asivia and the matriarch. "Or at least, we brought the option for it." Tyria laughed, a cold, rasping sound. "You speak human? I thought the weapon would have hollowed you out by now. I see my niece has been diligent in her duties as a battery." Jace's eyes narrowed. The violet light in his irises flared. "She isn't a battery. She's my partner. And we aren't here to surrender. We are here to give you a choice. Call off the fleets. End the hunt. And if I refuse?" Tyria challenged. "If I order my guards to slaughter you where you stand." "Then you lose," Asivia said. She stepped up beside Jace, her hand resting on his arm. The touch sent a visible ripple of white light through his tactical suit. "We control the dead fleet, and we have the firepower to glass this moon, but we chose not to. We chose to talk." Tyria slammed her staff onto the floor. "There is nothing to talk about. You have polluted the bloodline. You have handed the keys of the gods to a mud-dwelling ape who fixes air conditioners." The insult hung in the air. The human delegation bristled. Jace didn't get angry. He smiled. It was a small, sad smile. "You really don't get it, do you?" he asked quietly. "You think this is about power. You think this is about conquest." He looked at Asivia. He looked at the way the light played on her face, the fierce set of her jaw, the vulnerability she hid from everyone but him. "She touched me as a joke," Jace said, addressing the entire room. The delegates murmured in confusion. "We were at a dinner just like this," Jace continued, his voice gaining strength. "She was bored. She wanted to shock me. She grabbed my thigh under the table because she wanted to see the human jump. It was a prank, a moment of chaos." He looked back at Tyria. "But what she awakened was everything I ever needed." Jace raised his hand, palm open. "She didn't just turn on a weapon, matriarch. She turned on me. She woke up the part of me that refused to be small, and I woke up the part of her that refused to be cruel." Tyria sneered. "Sentimental drivel. Kill them." The command was abrupt. The stealth guards didn't hesitate this time. 6 of them, positioned around the room, opened fire, the air filled with the screech of high-velocity plasma bolts. Ambassador Kincaid screamed and dove under the table. Jace didn't move. He didn't dodge. He simply clenched his fist. The plasma bolts stopped in midair, inches from his face. They hung there, quivering, trapped in a bubble of localized gravity distortion. Returning to the sender, Jace muttered. He flicked his fingers. The bolts reversed direction, slamming back into the rifles of the guards who had fired them. The weapons exploded, sending the elites sprawling, but it was a trap. Tyria knew they could handle standard fire. As the guards fell, the floor of the great hall dropped away. Asivia and Jace fell into the darkness of the sub-basement, a cavernous logistical staging area beneath the waterfall. As they fell, floodlights snapped on, blindingly bright. Waiting for them was a mechanized division, 3 heavy combat walkers, 20 armored shock troopers, and Tyria herself, who had descended on a gravity platform, her staff glowing with green fell energy. "This ends now," Tyria shrieked. She fired a beam of green disintegration energy from her staff. It was a capital ship-class weapon shrunk down to a handheld device. Asivia twisted in midair. She didn't have flight capabilities, but Jace did. "Catch me," she yelled in her mind. "Got you." Jace's voice resonated in her skull. He grabbed her hand. Gravity shifted. They stopped falling and hung suspended in the center of the cavern. Jace threw up his free hand, creating a violet prism shield. The green beam struck the shield. The impact was deafening. The energy cascaded around them like water, sizzling against the damp air of the waterfall cavern. Jace grunted, the strain visible on his face. "She is using an amplified core," he shouted over the roar. "I can't hold this forever." "Then we attack," Asevia yelled. She pulled her knees to her chest and kicked off of Jace's hip, using him as a solid launch pad in the empty air. Jace dropped the shield and blasted a pulse of kinetic force behind her, launching her forward like a missile. Asevia flew through the air, her body wreathed in white light. She drew 2 energy blades from her belt, weapons she had taken from the enforcer on the moon. She hit the first combat walker. She was a blur of motion, faster than the machine's tracking sensors could follow. She sliced through the hydraulic joints of the leg, then vaulted off the collapsing chassis to decapitate the sensor array. Jace provided the cover. He hovered above the fray, raining down bolts of violet lightning. He didn't target the troopers, he targeted their gear. He fused their weapon barrels. He overloaded their jetpacks. He turned the ground beneath the second walker into quicksand, sinking the massive machine until it was immobilized. It was a dance of destruction. They moved with a synchronization that was impossible for 2 separate beings. When Asevia needed cover, Jace was there with a shield. When Jace needed to recharge, Asevia drew the fire. Tyria watched her elite force dismantled in under 60 seconds. Her fury broke her composure. She dropped the gravity platform, landing on the wet floor of the cavern. She threw aside her staff and ripped off her veil. Her face was twisted, her eyes burning with the madness of the old blood. "If I cannot control the weapon, I will break it." She raised both hands. The waterfall behind her began to boil. She was a high-level psionic herself, a master of hydrokinesis. She pulled the millions of gallons of water from the falls and shaped them into a massive, crushing serpentine beast. The water dragon roared, a sound of crashing waves, and lunged at Jace. Jace braced himself. He poured every ounce of power he had into a barrier, but the sheer mass of the water hammered him into the ground. He was pinned, drowning in a sphere of pressurized liquid. "Jace!" Asevia screamed. She turned from the troopers she was fighting. She saw him trapped, saw the violet light in the water beginning to fade as he ran out of air. Tyria laughed, clenching her fists to tighten the sphere. "Look at him. He drowns like any other rat." Asevia felt a cold rage unlike anything she had ever known. It wasn't the hot anger of battle. It was the absolute zero of a queen protecting her king. She didn't run to him. She reached out with her mind. She slammed into the bond, finding Jace's fading consciousness. "Take it," she commanded. "Take all of it." She pushed her own life force, her own royal psionic reserves. Down the connection, inside the water sphere, Jace's eyes snapped open. They didn't glow violet. They glowed blinding white. He didn't push the water away. He flash froze it. In a microsecond, the crushing sphere turned into a hollow ball of ice. Jace shattered it from the inside, exploding outward in a shower of diamond dust. He didn't land. He stayed airborne, wreathed in steam and ice. He looked at Tyria. "You hurt her," Jace said. His voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. He raised his hand. Tyria tried to pull more water, but Jace clenched his fist. He severed her connection to the physical world. He wrapped her in a gravity well so intense she couldn't move a finger. She dropped to her knees, gasping, cut off from her own power. Jace descended slowly, landing in front of her. Asevia walked to his side, her blades drawn but lowered. The remaining troops threw down their weapons. The combat walkers powered down. No one wanted to fight the god who had just frozen a waterfall. Tyria looked up at them, hatred burning in her eyes. "Do it!" she hissed. Finish the cycle. Kill the queen to take the throne. It is the Vireliath way. Jace looked at Asivia. The bond hummed between them. A question and an answer passed in a heartbeat. No, Asivia said. She sheathed her blades. We are not finishing the cycle. Aunt, we are breaking it. Jace released the gravity hold, just enough for Tyria to breathe, but not enough to fight. There will be no more queens, Jace stated, his voice amplified to reach the stunned delegates peering down from the shattered floor above. There will be no more bloodline monarchy. The Sinvara is not a crown. It is a shield. Asivia stepped forward. You will surrender your fleet codes, she told Tyria. You will disband the High Council, and you will stand trial for your crimes against the species. And if I refuse, Tyria spat. Asivia leaned down, her face inches from the matriarchs. Then Jace will put you in a bubble of time so slow that you will spend the next 1,000 years thinking about your answer, while only an hour passes for the rest of us. Tyria looked at Jace. He nodded, the violet light pulsing gently on his chest. Don't tempt me, Jace said. I've got a lot of catching up to do on my reading. I could use the quiet. Tyria slumped. The fight went out of her. The realization that she was facing something beyond her comprehension, something that balanced mercy with infinite power, broke her. She tapped her wrist comp, disabling the fleet's attack protocols. It is done, she whispered. Jace looked at Asivia. He let out a long breath, and the glowing circuitry on his chest dimmed to a faint, resting hum. Did we just win? He asked softly. Asivia took his hand, interlacing their fingers. Yes, Technician Miller. I believe we did. Months later. The moon of Kalis 9 had once been a barren rock, much like the one where they had found the temple. Now, it was green. The terraforming project was the first joint venture between the Human Alliance and the remnants of the Vireliath houses. It was a symbol of the new era. The atmosphere was thick and oxygen-rich, smelling of pine and damp earth. Jace sat on the edge of a cliff overlooking a new ocean. He was wearing a simple shirt and trousers. The tactical gear long retired. The violet markings on his skin were still there, but they looked more like an intricate tattoo now, dormant and beautiful. He was tinkering with a drone, a small, bird-like machine designed to plant seeds in hard-to-reach crevices. Asivia walked up behind him. She wore a loose tunic and trousers, her feet bare in the grass. She carried 2 cups of tea. She sat down beside him, handing him a cup. The delegation from the Zephyrian Dominion is leaving, she said. Lord Vax wanted to say goodbye, but he was afraid you might turn him into a handbag if he got too close. Jace chuckled, taking the tea. I only threatened that once, and he was being rude to the catering staff. He set the drone down and looked out at the twin suns setting on the horizon. One was orange, the other a pale blue. They cast long, mixed shadows across the water. It's quiet, Jace said. It is. Asivia agreed. Do you miss the noise? The voices? No, Jace said immediately. He tapped his temple. It's just me in here now. Well, me and you. He looked at her. The bond was always there, a warm hum in the background of his thoughts, like a radio playing a favorite song in another room. We did good work today. Sev. The treaty is holding. The hybrid schools are opening next week. Asivia sipped her tea, hiding a smile. You realize they are calling you the architect of peace in the press now? It is a very dignified title for a man who eats cereal for dinner. Jace nudged her with his shoulder. Hey, cereal is efficient, and I seem to remember the great diplomat Asivia stealing my bowl last night. I was inspecting it for poison. She lied smoothly. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the suns dip lower. You know, Asivia said, her voice turning playful. I have been thinking about how this started. Oh no, Jace groaned. Here we go, I am just saying, she continued, walking her fingers along his arm. If I had known that grabbing your thigh was the activation code for galactic salvation, I might have done it sooner. Jace rolled his eyes, though he was smiling. You didn't grab it for salvation, Sev. You grabbed it because you have a cruel sense of humor and wanted to see the technician squeak. I did not want you to squeak, Asivia protested, though her eyes danced with mirth. I wanted you to gasp. There is a difference. All I did was sit there and try to translate a menu, Jace said, and you assaulted me. I liberated you, she corrected. Jace set his tea down. He turned to face her, his expression shifting from playful to something warmer, deeper. He reached out and took her hand. He ran his thumb over her knuckles, feeling the strength in them. Next time, he said, his voice dropping to a murmur. Try my hand first. Asivia looked at him. The memory of the fear, the running, the battles, it all faded, leaving only this moment. She leaned in, her forehead resting against his. I have your hand, Jace. I have all of you. And I have you, he whispered. They kissed as the twin suns vanished below the horizon. It wasn't a kiss of desperate survival or of power transfer. It was a slow, deliberate kiss between two people who had saved the world so they could have the time to do exactly this. Above them, the first stars of the evening appeared. They weren't frightening anymore. They were just lights, guiding them home. Final scene, 10 years later. The Hall of Learning on Kalis 9 was a place of light and open air. It was a school for the gifted, for the diplomats, and for the children of the new alliance. Jace stood on the balcony, watching the training yard below. He had a few gray hairs at his temples now, but he looked fit, happy. Asivia stood beside him, her arm linked through his. Look, she said, pointing down. In the center of the yard, a group of children were practicing meditation. Humans. Vireliath, Zephyrians, all sitting in a circle. One little girl, no older than 7, was struggling to sit still. She was human, with messy dark hair and a scowl that looked very familiar to Jace. She opened her eyes, bored. She looked at the boy next to her, a young Vireliath with pale skin. He was deep in meditation, ignoring her. The girl sighed. She reached out, a mischievous glint in her eye, and poked the boy in the ribs. The boy jumped, eyes snapping open. As he did, a spark jumped between them. It wasn't violet. It was gold, on the girl's arm beneath the sleeve of her tunic. A faint network of golden veins flared to life, pulsing with a gentle, warm light. The boy's eyes widened, and his own skin began to shimmer with a matching resonance. Jace froze. He gripped the railing. Did you see that? He asked. Asivia saw it. She watched as the two children looked at each other, not with fear, but with wonder. The girl giggled, and the boy smiled, the golden light dancing between them like fireflies. I saw it, Asivia said softly. Jace looked at his wife. Is that another one? Like us? Asivia shook her head, resting her cheek on his shoulder. No, she said. Ours was a weapon. Jace. Ours was built for war and repurposed for peace. She looked down at the golden light glowing in the courtyard. That is something new. That is what happens when the bond is born from friendship, not desperation. Jace watched the children laugh, the golden light swirling around them, lifting the leaves from the ground in a playful vortex. So, no galactic invasion this time? Jace asked hopefully. Asivia laughed, a sound that was free and light. No invasion, my love, just evolution. They stood together, the architect and the queen, watching the future unfold in the golden light of a new day, content in the knowledge that the galaxy was in good hands, even if those hands occasionally poked someone in the ribs just to see what would happen.